Would the members of the Executive Committee please come to Committee Room 1 for quorum?
Good morning, colleagues and ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome everybody to the 27th meeting of the Executive Committee and begin by acknowledging that we're meeting today on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and home to many diverse Indigenous peoples. I will remind people who are not in this room, or even those who are, that we can be watched outside of being in this room on YouTube at Toronto City Council Live, or follow the meeting on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? And if so, please indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In an abundance of caution, I'd like to declare an interest on item 12, item 10 within item 12. If we could pull that out on a separate vote. Toronto Public Library, as although on medical leave, my wife is still technically an employee of the Toronto Public Library. So I think with the clerk's consent, I think if we pull out item 10 on item 12, I think that will do it. And item 27, capital plan, Toronto Public Library as well.
Thanks, Councillor Pasternak. Any other declarations under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Okay. May I have a motion, please, to confirm the minutes of the Executive Committee meeting of June 19th, 2017, moved by Councillor Thompson. Councillor McMahon, all those in favour? Opposed? Carried. So let's proceed with a review of the agenda, and if you want to hold an item, please state your name, as you know, in the usual manner, and we'll go from there. Toronto Hydro Corporation Annual General Meeting and Audited Financial Statements, number 27, EX 27.1.
I would like to hold it.
Hold by Councillor Shiner. 27.2, donation of smart thermostats for Toronto Community Housing. Motion to approve the item. Motion moved by Councillor Thompson, Councillor McMahon. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27.3, we are holding for deputations. 27.4, holding for deputations. 27.5, holding for deputations. 27.6, I would like to hold that if I could. That's the adjustment to 2 affordable housing loans to the YWCA of Greater Toronto. 27.7, Canadian National Exhibition Association, CNEA permit for West Channel water shows. Held by Councillor Thompson. 27.8 is Ravine Strategy is being held for deputations. 27.9, regularizing Toronto for All Public Education Initiative to support civic resiliency being held for deputations. 27.10, update on smart cities being held for a presentation. 27.11, commuter parking options, Toronto York Spadina subway extension, held by Councillor Pasternak. 27.12, a citywide real estate delegated authorities framework and transition plan.
Mayor Tory, I'd like to hold that briefly.
Being held by Councillor Shiner. 27.13, confirmation of sustainable energy plan financing interest rate policy. May I have a motion from Councillor Ainsley, seconded by Councillor McMahon. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27.14 and 14A, creating 298 affordable rental homes in Toronto, results of the 2017 open door call for applications. You want to move it or hold it? Move it? Move it. Moved by Councillor Bilo, seconded Councillor DeGiorgio. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27.15 is being held for deputations, creating 600 affordable rental homes at West Donlands and 27 Grosvenor, 26 Granville sites. 27.16, Open Door Affordable Housing Program 2016 Annual Activity Report. Recommendation the report be received. Moved by Councillor Bilo. Councillor Shiner. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27.17, authority to take part in the province's Home for Good program, $90 million allocated to Toronto. Do I have a motion let's see, authorize the staff to move with that? Councillor Shiner moves it. Councillor Bilo. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27.18, capital variance report for the 6-month period ended June 30th, 2017. Moved by Councillor Crawford. Seconded Councillor DeGiorgio. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27.19, operating variance report for 6-month period ended June 30th, 2017. Moved by Councillor Crawford. Councillor DeGiorgio. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27.20, capital budget reallocation request, Toronto Fire Services data architecture and data integration modernization strategy. This is coming from the Budget Committee. It's moved by Councillor Crawford.
Hold that, Mayor
You want to
Tory?
hold that?
Yes, please.
Okay, held by Councillor Ainsley. 27.21, tree protection enforcement. Again, coming from the Budget Committee, to move the adoption of the recommendation. Seconded Councillor McMahon. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27.22, adjustments and deferrals, accelerations to the Park, Forestry and Recreation 2017 capital budget and 28-26 capital plan. And this is coming from the Budget Committee. Is there a motion from Councillor Crawford to accept the recommendations from the Budget Committee? Second, Councillor McMahon again. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27-23, Toronto Water 2017 capital budget and 2018-2026 capital plan adjustments, again coming from the Budget Committee, moved by Councillor Crawford. Hold that. Hold Councillor Ainsley. 27-23. 27-24, I will hold that if I may. That's the adjustment to the 2017-2026 capital budget and plan for King Liberty Pedestrian Bridge. 27-25, Transportation Services 2017 capital budget adjustments coming from the Budget Committee. Moved by Councillor Crawford, seconded Councillor DeGiorgio. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27-26, Facilities capital budget 2018-26 capital plan adjustments and accelerations and deferrals. September, coming from the Budget Committee. Moved by Councillor Crawford. Councillor DeGiorgio. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Councillor. This is a matter on which we have, none of the ones up to date were one of the ones you mentioned, Councillor. So we're just the first one now, correct? That Councillor Pasternak. So he'll step out. And it's 27.27, Toronto Public Library 2017 Capital Budget Adjustments, second quarter, coming from the Budget Committee, moved by Councillor Crawford, Councillor Ainsley. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27.28, Official Plan Amendment, Status of City Subcommittee Actions. This is recommendation coming forward from the Board of Governors of Exhibition Place.
Can I hold that, please?
You want to hold that, Councillor
Yes,
Ainsley?
please.
Okay, held by Councillor Ainsley. On 27.29, unless there's anybody who wants to hold it, I do have a motion which is simply housekeeping in that you'll see the recommendation request the city manager to prepare a preliminary report for the September 5th, 2017 meeting. And in fact, that meeting has already been held, so we would simply change, and I think the motion can be up there, to change it to the November 10th, 2017 Budget Committee, showing the immediate budgetary impacts and so on of the provincial minimum wage. So it just has that report presented to the next meeting. If people are content, we can then move the item forward on that basis with the amendment. So the motion as amended, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Shiner, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27.30 is being held for deputations. That's the motion to do with the Toronto Police Service. The next one is 27.31, further direction to the city manager on the study of the commuter parking crisis in Toronto. You want to? The one to do with the Wilson, with the Spadina subway. Yeah, we talked about that in the staff run-up, that we'll deal with those in some way together. And then finally, we have the the Sherman campus request for relief on development charges, and moved by Councillor Pasternak, seconded by Councillor DeGiorgio. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. So, that brings us to, back to item 1, and it was being held by Councillor Shiner, I believe. Is that correct? Yes. So, did you have, were there any members of, Oh, I see. Okay, I hadn't anticipated necessarily. Did you want a presentation, Councillor Shiner, or the members of the committee? No, I think they're from Hydro, correct, to present the report?
No, that's not correct. We're just here to respond to any questions.
Oh, okay, fine. That's great. Super. So I was just going to move then 2 questions of staff, but see if there are any members of the, not members of the executive committee, members of council who wanted to start asking any questions of staff on this report. All right. Seeing none, I'll move then to members of the committee, and I had up first Councillor Shiner, and who else is lining up on this? We'll start with you then, Councillor Shiner.
So, Mayor, through you, Mayor Tory, I think it was Councillor Menon Wong that moved the motion at council that put a maximum of 25% on performance bonuses that any of our agencies or corporations should earn. So my question is, why is that not happening at Hydro?
Thank you, Councillor. It is actually a report that the board was instructed last AGM, and we're taking that very seriously and working hard to respond by the end of the year as directed. And I'm not privy to the board's outcome of that study, but I understand they're following the requirements of the motion, and that they will be responding for the executive in November.
When was the AGM?
I'm sorry?
When was the AGM?
Last year's AGM, and the motion instructed
When
us.
was it?
The
Chris, when was the AGM?
Last year's AGM,
When was it held, the date it was held?
July
Of what year?
2016.
Okay, so we're into September of 2017. Why does it take a year and a half to get that answer in front of the board?
The study actually is fairly detailed and requires comparators and other details that are not necessarily disclosed in a public domain. So ultimately, you have to get analysis and research that supports that evidence, and that takes time.
Sorry,
And
so
there
what-
is a lag of trying to get the updated information. So by this year, we will have very accurate information to show the comparators and the information that you need to
Well,
make.
what study are you conducting? I'm kind of lost here.
The study as directed by the motion that you raised last year at the AGM.
So I didn't raise any motion. Can you tell me the study that's ongoing and what the parameters of the study are, and can we actually get a copy of what the parameters of the study are?
Well, the motion actually outlined what we required as information to come back through a report, which will be channeled through the city manager's office in November. So I can't recall all of the details, but I understand very clearly by the board that they are satisfying all of this information that you request, and that will be delivered as a report to council.
Sorry, I'm not trying to go in circles, Chris, and we've worked together for a long time. There's a study being done. You
Correct.
hired someone to do that.
Correct.
Can we get a copy of what the requirements are of the study?
The requirements of the study are the motion.
But you gave instructions to someone and hired them to do something. Can we get a copy of what they were hired to do?
I would have to take that back to the board because that's a board issue. You actually instructed the board to do this study, so ultimately the board's responsibility and scope that they put in for the study is ultimately their decision.
So through you, Mayor Tory, to the city manager. We have an agency that's doing a study. There's nothing confidential about the names of those that might be in the study. It's simply getting information which the board will consider. Sorry, can I talk over here without yelling? Because I'm not prepared to do that today. I simply want to know what's being studied that was asked for a year and a half before we get it, so I know the information that is being looked at, so if there's any questions, I could deal with that in advance. Can you get that for me?
I can.
Can you get it for me when it comes to council?
Yes, and what I will do is I will take from this a sense of the concern that you've raised, Councillor, that there is a significant time lag between the AGM, between the council request, the AGM of 2016, the current report, and then the final report. And I will indicate to management at Toronto Hydro Corporation that it would be appropriate, in given the long lag and other factors, to allow councillors who are interested to understand the terms of reference with respect to the work being taken for the consultant study.
And when did the Toronto Hydro dealt with it at their 2016 AGM?
That was the answer provided, yes.
Right. When did council ask for that work to be done?
My understanding is that was a July 2016 motion from Councillor Min and Wong. I'm doing that from memory, though.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shiner. Are there any other questions of staff? Councillor Thompson.
So just so that I'm clear, through to you, the city manager, through you, Mr. Mayor, a motion was passed by the deputy mayor. Is that correct?
I believe motion was brought forward by the deputy mayor, passed by council, yes.
Right. So the direction would come from the motion. Is that correct?
That is correct.
There are no other directions
Not as far as I am aware.
based on the motion.
That's correct.
So if one wants to understand what the request is per the motion, one needs to have a copy of the motion to review. Would that be correct?
That would be correct.
Right. And so the motion is sent from council to the Board of Hydro, who then directs that the study be done?
That is correct. They may request additional information as they undertake that study.
That was my next point, because that then could then lead to more time required in order to complete the totality of what has been asked, both in conjunction with respect to that of council, by way of motion, and the board itself.
That could take more time. There has already been considerable time passed.
Right, and that's to be determined based on the discussion that you will have through your office with, I guess, the board chair, and not directly to the staff.
I will link with both the board chair and the staff.
Okay, so your authority, though, is that directly to staff, since this is a entity, I realize that the sole shareholder is the City of Toronto, but your communications Is that direct to staff or the board? What is your authority?
My authority will be frankly, to intervene on what I believe to be a common sense basis. I believe that Councillor Shiner has indicated some concern that he does not have adequate information in advance of a long-standing issue that has been concerned to him and to others on this committee. I believe he's made, from my perspective, a relatively straightforward request to get adequate information in advance to allow him to ask questions. So he's not, again, put in a situation of not being able to formulate appropriate questions, a view and questions to staff and others in advance of the meeting.
Right. What I wanted to drive at, Mr. City Manager, through you, Mr. Mayor, is that we were not actually asking an improper ask through you to the board and to staff. Is that correct?
That is correct. I believe that as the shareholder, council should be able to request and receive information, and this is with respect and care, a long-standing issue, and I am not troubled by any request. I don't think there's an authority issue with any request that we provide a councillor or councillors with the opportunity and information to undertake their duties.
So Mr. Terrell today is not able to answer all the question. There's nothing that would be improper in terms of him not having all the information, given the fact that perhaps the structure in the organization is such. We wouldn't necessarily having him come in here that he would know all the answers. Would you expect that?
I would not expect him to have all of those answers. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I have Councillor Pasternak with questions of staff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. On page 7 of the report before us, it states that on December 31st, 2016, Toronto Hydro's debentures were rated A by Standard & Poor's with a negative outlook. Now that apparently was restored only when the city put in $250 million in an equity contribution. Would you consider that move a bailout?
No, it's just correcting the balance sheet to be within the deemed ratio of the Ontario Energy Board. It was a necessary one-time equity injection to do so and to restore our credit rating.
And do you feel Toronto Hydro can meet all of its obligations to its various debenture and bondholders and
Absolutely.
other debtors? Will you be coming back to the city for more?
No, not in the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pasternak. Any other questions of staff? All right, then we can move to speakers, if there are any that want to speak on this. I see none.
You're welcome to, Mayor, if you have some better comments.
Well, I was only going to say that I think it's kind of been alluded to in a very polite manner by the city manager, and your questions were designed to elicit the same thing, that, I hope we can do better with respect to the responsiveness of any agency or corporation in which we are either the only or a significant shareholder with respect to this kind of information. But I do understand there was an external study that was conducted to help provide complete information. But now that we'll have it on a timely basis going forward from now, exactly as the city manager said, so that all of us can formulate our opinions and questions we have about that study so that we're not receiving it at the last minute. And I think the fact that it's being discussed today, I don't really think we need any motions or anything, because it's coming forward as a separate report responsive to the city motion, is a good thing, so that you're on notice, if I can put it that way. I don't want it to sound unduly provocative, but you're on notice that we want it. We want it on a timely basis so that we have time to take a look at it, and hopefully it will be complete in the context of the direction that came from the City Council representing the sole shareholder.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And that's all I have to say. I will support the receipt of the report. Councillor Shiner?
So I will comment on it, and maybe it's, I don't like it when things aren't said, and I think it's appropriate to say what you're thinking. So the first thing is, Chris, I'm sorry you had to be here today, because I've always seen our agencies, boards, and commissions send the chair and or send the president and CEO, and you're not that. I respect you very much and all the work that you've done on Hydro and the work we've done here, but I don't think it's appropriate that you're here. I think that the president and CEO should have been here himself to answer the question that council's been asking for a long time. And the question is, why are the bonuses for the senior executive almost 100%? and some of the others 60% when we say 25%. And where does that come from? In particular, in a year where you had to get a cash injection and you had to get the council to shore up your credit rating. And most of all, is that the right way that our agencies and boards should be running? Because I don't think members of council feel that way, and I don't think the public feels that way. But if it's justified, then that information should be in front of us so we can see it and accept it. And the fact that the review hasn't been done, that the information hasn't here, that's a year and a half before your board even gets it, puts a view on it that it's not a cooperative with us and we're not able to do our job right. And that's really what I want to see, and not put any, not make it look as if it's wrong, but if you don't answer me, it certainly doesn't appear as if it's right. And that's been my attitude, and the mayor's seen it ever since he's joined us here, and my colleagues. Council, if there's a question, answer the question. If it's right, you think it's right, stand behind it. But not answering, not coming forth with information that we can look at and determine, doesn't let us as a council follow through on our due diligence to the taxpayers of the City of Toronto. So I'm extremely disappointed in the way this has gone forward for a year and a half, and I really want and hope that the city manager can help bring this information to us and we can conclude this so it doesn't keep going on and on and on, and most of all, that the board and the staff at Hydro respect the wish of council through Councillor Menon Wong's motion as far as what the maximum performance bonuses should be, and we can get on with our lives, because this has been here for far too long and going around in far too many circles, and it's just not right, in my opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Schneider. Deputy Mayor Menon Wong.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I just want to create some context to this report in front of us. This is related to the Toronto Hydro Corporation audited financial statements. So this is just in a multi-billion-dollar company, very, very small little thing that Councillor Schreiner's identified. We have been dealing with this at the board, and just, the idea that, that Hydro has been somewhat slow, or they've been laggards in providing this information. There's also some context here, because I remember moving the motion. And I do understand, I sit on the board of Hydro, but I also sit on a number of other boards. They're not the only ones. I don't believe that Toronto Parking Authority was on time with theirs. I don't believe Build Toronto submitted, I don't know if they submitted theirs on time or not. So just to go after one agency here today for being slow is, I think there has to be a certain level of context to it. I've seen the report because I'm on the board. There's been a vigorous debate. There are certain consequences to what council is asking for. I'm not sure that we actually said, let's do this. It was like, we'd like to see if you could put some framework, a framework around executive compensation that was more in keeping with what we do here at the city. But there are consequences, I suspect, when the report does come forward. My understanding is coming forward in November. We actually might even have to go in camera, because when you actually put, when you put in some salary constraints, there are certain labor relations issues that flow from that, and certain consequences that are going to result that council is going to have to know about. So look, Hydro salaries are very generous. Some of the salaries are, well, they are the highest in any organization here at the city or any other agency, board, or commission. We have our first employee that makes over $1 million, and that's certainly, it's going to attract attention. So let's wait and see when we get this report come forward, and let's and I, quite frankly, I have made my views known inside on the board of Toronto Hydro. Let's have a vigorous discussion when it comes forward, and not jump to any conclusions before we see the information.
Thanks, Councillor Menon Wong. Any other speakers? All right, then. I don't think, in the context of the discussion, because there's another report coming forward, there's any, nobody moved any motions, so I think we can just proceed with, just looking here, there it is. The recommendations adopts the recommendations of the Toronto Hydro report. receive the Toronto annual report and various things, as you can see, directs that certain attachments be kept confidential. Really, that's the gist of it. So can may I have somebody move that? Councillor Pasternak? Councillor Crawford? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. That's 1 and 1A. The next item we have is 27.3, and on that, we were holding that for deputations. We have one deputant, John Hollins. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Item 27.3, I didn't name, it's the municipal election-related matters. And it speaks particularly, as you know, to the contribution rebate program. Good day, Mr. Hollins.
Did I get that right? Yes. Good day, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for coming, and you, as you know, you have 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. My name is John Hollins. I last appeared before this committee in 2015, at which time we were discussing the retrofitting of existing technology for the electoral system in the City of Toronto, which is in particular the tabulators, and the numerous options that I believed were available to the city at that time. And within those discussions, I felt that there was some direction. The direction being, let's go have a look at what the marketplace has. And I think instruction was also to continue dialogue with both myself and the Chief Electoral Officer of Ontario. I'm here today also to ensure that the city has all of the facts as they move forward. I see that, and I should confess that both myself, I was actually made aware of the report by the Chief Electoral Officer on Friday. And in our discussions, we both were surprised that we hadn't been kept in the loop over the last 12 to 18 months. That's again a reason for me to come this morning to lay out some of the facts that exist. Retrofitting your 17-year-old technology will come at a cost, $1.550 million, as opposed to renting technology. And I'll give you 2 examples. In 2014, the City of Sudbury rented tabulators at $625 per tabulator, which comes in under your price considerably. And the Chief Election Officer, in talking to him on Friday, confirmed that he will be renting and making all of his new technology, which is just being purchased this year, available to municipalities at $200 per tabulator, which brings him in at about $370,000, which is an approximate savings of $1.2 million to the City of Toronto. Today, I urge you to defer this decision and instruct the City Clerk to request a quote from interested vendors and the Chief Electoral Officer of Ontario for the rental lease of 1,850 tabulators for the City of Toronto 2018 municipal elections. The price to include the supply of the necessary hardware, software, goods and services, including system integration and training. I believe that a competitive bidding process will benefit the City of Toronto taxpayers and provide them with better technology at a better price. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Hollins. Do we have questions of the deputant, starting with members from council visiting the executive committee? Councillor Mammoliti?
So, what's the cost to this?
If I'm following your reports correctly, you're retrofitting technology for $1.550 million, which is 17 years old. And I'm suggesting that the alternative is to rent it from the province of Ontario for $370,000.
What's wrong with the system we have now?
You need to retrofit it. You have to go in and change your technology. You have to add modems so that you can do your results.
And what's the cost just to retrofit?
1,550, if I read your reports correctly.
All right. So what are we leasing from the province?
Brand new technology that they'll be using for their June election.
So it's cheaper to do that than to retrofit?
Oh, much cheaper, yes.
And what's the difference between the province's technology and this one that we have?
It's certified to the latest standards. It's widely used. It's the leading edge technology.
And do you think the province is game to just let us use it for nothing? Or do we?
No, they're going to charge you $200 per tabulator, which I believe are their costs to get it to you and get it back.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Mamalidi. Other questions of the deputy? If there are no others, I might, oh, sorry, Councillor Pasternak, did you have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Just very quickly, are you aware that council has rejected the option of going to ranked ballot?
Yes, I do. Yes, I am. But I think all the latest technologies actually embrace that.
So why would we be going to a new generation of technology for a policy we have not endorsed? Ranked ballot.
To save $1 million.
We're not going ahead with ranked balloting. Why would we need the software integration for ranked balloting when we're not going ahead with it?
Okay. As I understand it, your technology is being retrofitted not for ranked ballot. It's being retrofitted to put modems in the machines at a cost of $1.550. So you're taking 17-year-old technology, retrofitting it with a modem so that you can complete this election in 2018. I'm suggesting there's technology out there available to you that already does that at a much lower price.
Thanks, Councillor Pasternak. I just had a couple of questions to follow on if no one else has any. I'll start the clock there. Mr. Hollins, can you help us with any of the following? Because we'll follow up with our own staff on this, obviously. First of all, there are adequate numbers of machines to meet our need on the dates in question under this arrangement you're here promoting, the lease
I
arrangement?
understand that the province of Ontario bought 6,000 tabulators.
Okay. Secondly, I think you made allusion to the fact they have been used, I presume, in by-elections or otherwise already, and so they've...
This technology is being used globally, yes, and their first use, I don't know if they have any by-elections, but their first use will be June with the exact machines.
That's very interesting. So there
machines.
hasn't been in Ontario, and I heard you say that it's been used elsewhere outside of Ontario, but it hasn't been used in Ontario or in Canada, to your knowledge yet?
The technology itself has, I think they might have a couple of more add-ons inside their machine for them going forward.
But so the answer is no, though. It hasn't been used here
yes.
or in Canada.
I believe it's been used in Canada.
Okay. That sort of means you probably won't have an answer, maybe, to this question. Is there quite a bit of training that would be involved? Because, again, I'm going to ask our own staff this question in the context of our election that happens in 13 months. And so you'd have to, the machines will be in use in a provincial election, you said, in June.
Yes.
Then we'd have to somehow, between now and then, train our staff. Would there be training involved in the use of these by the clerks and people who are hired on the day to run the polling stations on how to use this new machinery?
Because it would be new to you, there would be some training. Impact on the voter, you'd have exactly the same ballot. It's just if you went to this technology, or even if you did a quote and got a similar technology to what you have. No, I think they're similar. There would be minimal training, yes.
And I presume there's a cost to that training, as has been borne. Are you aware of whether the province has put people through training and how much that might have cost? Because that has to be factored in, obviously, to your comparison.
Yeah, I think when you do a quote to the vendors, I'm not suggesting you take the province. I'm saying that's out there. That's a fact, that stuff's out there. I'm suggesting you design what your election is, ask 2 companies to quote on it, and take which one you want. And I'm just suggesting your pricing will be a lot lower than what you're facing right now.
So just, are they leasing these machines themselves, the province, from a vendor?
No, they're buying them.
They bought them.
And then...
So we would lease them from them, so that if we were doing that, because that's the number you brought here, 370,000.
300, yeah.
Pardon me?
370.
Yes, 370,000. Then we would have to look to them, I'm assuming, for the training, or to somebody. I mean...
No, I would imagine that they would do a third-party vendor and bring them into the contract to fulfill anything that you need, whatever your requirements are.
Okay. Final question. Are you here just in your capacity as a past chief? I'm aware you're obviously the past chief.
No, I just concerned citizen, actually.
Just a concerned citizen?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We then would move to questions of staff, and we have Councillor Mammoliti and Councillor Karygiannis from visiting with us. So, Councillor Mammoliti, please go ahead.
Wouldn't it just make sense for the city to get their own equipment and perhaps even lease it out to other municipalities if we have to make some money back? Is that possible to do?
Mr. Mayor, that's exactly what we have, and that's exactly what we've done with it. We had the decision of council in November, I believe, of last year, at which time council decided that one last election we would use this equipment. It is coming to the end of its life. But I have to tell you that there are 16 applications that this system needs to fit into. So there's an extensive amount of rework that would need to be done. And I think it's important also to remember that the election in the province is in June of this year, which would give us exactly 3 months to redo this work.
We're cutting it close if we choose to do something with the province, right?
Far too close. The elections need to be about integrity, not about equipment.
And we've leased our equipment out to other municipalities in the past?
Yes, we have, and
And how much
provinces.
money have we made by doing that?
I don't have that figure at hand. But we've certainly more than recovered our cost of the equipment.
All right. So it's not a ridiculous amount of money, really. If we're going to be recovering it, and we've shown that we're recovering money regularly with our own system, it's not a ridiculous price to pay at $1.5 million to boot up the system again properly and fix it up, and then start making money on it again. We'd probably make our money back again, wouldn't we?
Well, I'm not certain about that. I can never tell you that for certain until I get a request. But what I can tell you is that this is for the maintenance of the equipment, and it is not for the entire amount for this election. There is an amount of about $500,000, which would only be paid in the event of a by-election at some point, or various by-elections.
So we really haven't had many problems with our system that we've had over the years, right? I mean, there's been a few glitches, but nothing crazy, right?
Nothing whatsoever that's been major, no. We've had the odd issue, with a tabulator, but nothing that is of significance.
And you wouldn't anticipate that would change if we did the work we needed to do on the existing system?
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mammoliti. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, thank you very much for providing some clarification. Do you foresee us using these machines for one last time? Any difficulties that might arise, or are these machines with any retrofit that you're going to have will pull us through this election?
I'm not anticipating any difficulty whatsoever with this equipment. It has worked very, very well for many elections now, and it's been shipped all over the place, and it's still incredibly robust. We used it 6 times in the last year and a half, and it worked flawlessly.
So then you reassure us that we don't need to go to an expenditure right now in order to get new machines, and the next election will be without any 100%, but we are going to be just as close as we can in order to make sure that we have a robust and fair election.
Mr. Mayor, I have absolutely no difficulty with using this equipment again, and I would insist in any event that it is too late. It is simply too late to change the equipment at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Karygiannis. Are there other visiting members of council? Otherwise, we can move to the committee. I just had, if I could, a couple of questions of the clerk. Just the flip side of Councillor Karygiannis' question, which is that is it in your sort of thinking that also this is equipment that hasn't been used by us, and I guess for that matter, according to the deputy, it hasn't been used in Ontario, that there's a possibility we could have some problems, whereas Councillor Karygiannis extracted that we haven't had problems with our own equipment. That is it possible? I mean, have you seen this technology or heard about it or talked to anybody about it?
I have no idea whether this system would work as well as the one we have or not, Mr. Mayor, but what I can tell you is that this is not the time to start changing it. We would need to rewrite 16 massive applications, which I think would give Rob Meikle and his staff a heart attack.
Well, we certainly wouldn't want that. Maybe that just disposes of it right away. But can I just ask you to confirm that you don't think that there is the time available, even if we thought this was a good idea for financial or other reasons, that there's not the time available for reasons related to the 16 applications and other things?
No, that's why we brought the report forward for council to make a decision last year in November.
Right. And then just on I assume there would be a training cost, and maybe you could just speak to that, because I guess a lot of the people that end up operating these machines they're not volunteers, but they're people who come in on short-term employment for the election, and you'd have to identify who those people were and train them, and I presume there's a cost to that as well? If you were to go this 300, the leasing.
The training, Mr. Mayor, is not additional. It is rolled into the cost, which you can see on the chart on page 3. It's part of the municipal election cost.
I was talking about training though on the new machines.
Training on the new machines would be extensive.
Yeah.
It would, because in any event, it would be training on entire new systems.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions. Anybody else that has, Councillor DeGiorgio?
Yeah, so we own the machines, correct?
That's correct.
And what has been our history with respect to our leasing it out to other municipalities to use our equipment in the past?
I don't have that information with me, but the equipment has been to BC many times for municipal elections. It has been to Quebec. It has been to New Brunswick. It has been to the Philippines. It has been to Alberta. It has been used in U.S. elections many times.
Okay, so we have generated some revenue out of the ownership of those machines, correct?
Yes.
And then help me understand that one number that I'm having difficulty with, the cost related to by-elections up in the neighborhood of 520,000 for just by-elections, just in small wards relative to an election across the city. Why is that number so high relative to the cost of an election?
It is, in fact, a number that is based on the cost of conducting, what would be the cost of conducting a mayoralty election, which would be about $450,000, and up to 4 councillor or school board by-elections. So it's a contingency for many things.
Okay, but the way I see it written here, it's a contingency for up to 2 potential ward by-elections. Oh, and 1 citywide by-election. Okay, missed the citywide. Thank you.
Also school board.
Yep.
Councillor Shiner with a question.
Sorry, Yuli, which U.S. election?
2008.
Well, thank you. I was afraid we may have had part in the last U.S. election and didn't want to doubt any of the results there.
Thanks, Councillor Shiner. Are there any other questions of staff? All right, I'm happy to move then to speakers. Anybody, Councillor Mammoliti from outside of the Executive Committee? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on here, but there's no reason for us not to be proceeding with our own machines at whatever cost is associated to that. I think there's something going on the other side of this that tells me that someone might have a different agenda for how the City of Toronto votes and tries to do something contrary to Council's recommendations. And I think Councillor Pasternak hit hit the nail on the head there. So I think that that's what's going on here, and I would say to you that we probably can make the money back, or if not, make even more money if we continue leasing out to other municipalities. And our machines, Mr. Mayor, they seem to be stable. They work. They don't tend to lean. Well, sometimes they try to lean to the left, our machines, but for the most part, they're pretty stable. The ones from the province tend to lean to the left. I think this time around they're getting older, and they might go to the right a bit. It might even break them. Who knows what might happen in the upcoming provincial election? But I'm not. I think it's going to bring us bad luck if we lease anything out from the province. I'd rather stay with the system we have, fix it up. I think the clerk is comfortable with that, and there's just no logic for us to have even heard about a different model at this particular time. So I hope you've taken those comments as a recommendation from at least me.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Ramalidi. Any other visiting councillors, members of the committee wishing to speak? Councillor Shiner?
Well, having been a long-serving member of council and having those machines work for all those times, I think they're great, and the results have just been perfect.
Maybe not.
I've never seen them make a mistake yet, particularly in the wards which I represent. So I'm more than happy to move the recommendations that staff need here to keep those machines going.
Now I'm going to vote against it.
Thanks, Councillor Shiner. Any other speakers? I have a motion to make and a brief remarks accompanying us, really just to make a choice of these options here. So I'll do that then if no one else wants to speak. One of the other matters that we had to deal with in this item was the choice that was given to us in the report as to whether to proceed with a rebate program with respect to contributions or some other decision, and I am moving now that we authorize the rebate program, which is exactly the same as it has been in the past number of elections. There could be people who could debate it as to whether it's to this or to that, but the fact is I think it has worked to attract people to support candidates of all kinds running in the process, and it is at I think a reasonable cost. And so I'm moving that the recommendation shown on the screen here, which is to fund it from the Election Reserve Fund and to have the rebate program have the same parameters that it's had in past elections. And also it carries with it the recommendation, you can see number C here, that election campaign surplus funds become the property of the city, which has again been the practice followed in the last election. So I believe this is the right way to go. And again, it's back to sort of seeing if it works. Why would we start tampering with it? It has worked fairly well, both the equipment and the rebate program, and that we should stick with what's tried and true. So I'll be obviously supporting that. Are there any other speakers? All right, we're ready for the question then. First on the amendment to the recommendation number 1 to make the choice in favor of the rebate program. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Carried. All those on the item then, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, that then takes us to 27.4, third-party election advertising enforcement under the Municipal Elections Act 1996. And we have a deputant, Miroslav Glavic. Mr. Glavic, you're withdrawing from this one. Thank you very much. That would bring us, with no other deputants, to questions of staff by visiting members of the committee. Councillor Ramalidi.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what does this actually mean in terms of a sitting councillor or the mayor in terms of third-party advertising? What changes have been made in the Act?
Through the mayor.
I don't know if it's an next report or not, but it's the enforcement of it. I get it, but you got to enforce something. So I'd like to understand a little bit more about what changes have been made.
So through the mayor, the Municipal Elections Act for the first time integrates a framework for third-party advertising. The impact on candidates is essentially they cannot contribute to a third-party advertiser, and a third-party advertiser has rules they now have to follow. They need to identify the source of their funding for the sign and give information on the sign or the advertisement. and they have to register with the city clerk. So a lot of the rules for third-party advertisers are actually quite similar to the rules for candidates, including the financial compliance rules.
So if a third party wanted to advertise something on a billboard, they would need the city's permission to advertise it before they did it?
They would need to register with the city clerk, and they would need to follow particular information that the Act lays out that they have to include on that billboard.
So, for instance, if Black Lives Matter wanted to take out a third-party advertisement that says, "Don't vote for Councillor Mamalidi," what would be their responsibility as a third-party advertiser?
So after May the 1st, which is the new nomination day in the Act, Black Lives Matter would need to register with the city clerk and follow all the rules that the Act has laid out for third-party advertisers.
All right. If someone wanted to do the reverse and say, please vote for this person, would the candidate have to, the candidate that the third party's advertising for, would they have to somehow put that expense in their own election expense reports?
Through the mayor, no, Councillor. The third-party advertisers are quite separate from the candidate, so a candidate can't direct a third-party advertiser and has no obligation on financial disclosure.
So like a third party could say, don't vote against somebody, they can actually say, please vote for somebody, and they would have to go through the same process as any other third-party advertiser.
That's correct, Councillor. They can oppose or support a candidate.
And they do this without somebody saying no to them. The clerk can't say, no, we don't like you, third advertiser, so we're not going to endorse your third-party advertising.
The clerk has no enforcement role with third-party advertisers. As long as they follow the requirements of the Act, then they can essentially advertise what they deem appropriate. The city does have the authority, if they're breaching the MEA by not requiring or including the required information on their sign or not registering with the clerk, the city could actually remove that advertisement, but that would be the extent of our enforcement ability under the scenario that you've discussed.
Third-party advertising isn't just billboards, though, right? This could amount to someone sending out flyers to every single household, suggesting to vote for somebody or not to vote for somebody.
Yes, that's correct, Councillor. Third-party advertising could take any kind of form. It could be a billboard, it could be a householder, it could be a radio ad, a TV ad.
Be a commercial?
Could be a commercial. It's quite broad.
Is there a limit to the amount of money that a third-party person could spend on any one candidate?
So the province hasn't released all the regulations or forms related to third-party advertisement, and there will be a spending cap, but they haven't released that yet. It's usually based on population.
Population in a city or population in a ward?
We're not quite sure how they're going to do the spending cap for third-party advertisers. We're still waiting for that information from them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Mamalidi. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to staff. In the case of somebody, third-party advertiser, moving along and making slanderous remarks towards a candidate, something that's not founded, something which is inappropriate, what action can you take, if anything?
So the regulations in the Municipal Elections Act are focused on the way, the method in which a third-party advertiser can advertise, what they must provide when doing so, and a precondition that they must register in order to do so, and who they can be to be a third-party advertiser during a municipal election. It doesn't speak to content, although I understand some complaints may still come into the city about the content of some of these advertisements. It isn't focused on that type of content.
Through you to staff, if the content is inappropriate and the candidate takes legal action, is this still going to be deemed as part of the candidate's expense for the elections?
Mr. Mayor, the regime for spending and contributing to third-party advertisers is very different and separate from that of a candidate. So the two regimes are entirely separate.
I'm going to go back to my question, and maybe I didn't phrase it right. I'm running, somebody brings a slanderous remark and distributes it in my ward. I go to my lawyer and I say, this is slanderous, I want you to take action. The lawyer says, okay, the clock starts ticking by the time you walked in the door. That cost me $5,000 for the lawyer to pick up, right, letter and everything else. My limit is $40,000, I spent $5,000. Does that mean that the $5,000 that I spent to the lawyer in order to fight this off counts towards my election expense? You don't have an answer, do you? Maybe?
Councillor, I'm not sure it's clear cut whether or not that would be considered an election expense. I think we need to look at that scenario a little bit more deeply. But the one thing I did want to comment on is the city's sign bylaw does have some rules around what kind of content can be in a sign. So it can't be anti-hate, you know, it has to be somewhat appropriate. We do have to balance that with the freedom of expression under the Canadian Charter. So it can be a tricky
With the
scenario.
mayor to staff, city bylaw, sorry, for signs is one thing, but what about written format? What action would you take if somebody says that so-and-so is doing so-and-so and that's totally inappropriate? I mean, you can't defend the candidate, but the candidate has to defend himself or herself. So in that case, they have to go to the lawyer. And the bills start mounting up. If the bills start mounting up, there's less money that the candidate can have in order to advertise, to put up signs, to make phone calls, to rent space. And I mean, if anybody wants to do that, a third-party advertiser can start by doing this in order to instigate the candidate to go to a lawyer, and the bills start mounting up. I think that has to be taken into consideration, and those bills should be separate from fighting an election if you're fighting a legal battle.
Through the mayor, Councillor, I think, you know, the way that you've described that scenario and in conferring with our legal counsel, we believe that that would be considered a legitimate election expense.
But do you see what, I mean, I hope that everybody realizes what we're getting into. If you want to drain a candidate, the only thing you got to do if you're a third party and you don't like this candidate is move in that direction, put a flyer out that costs you $2,000, and then the candidate has to run to a lawyer, and it's depleting the expenses.
So, Councillor, I think that third-party advertisement has happened historically in elections. The difference now is that the Municipal Election Act includes it, and it's now a regulated activity.
Is there somehow that you can go back to the province and have the legal bills incurred in order the candidate has to fight the slanderous remarks be removed from the candidate's expenses?
So, Councillor, if I understand your question, is it that Council can request the province to make further amendments to the MEA? Certainly that's within Council's ability to make that request. But I would caution that given the timing and how close we are to an election, it is unlikely the province will make any further substantive amendments.
Is this something that you can watch during this election as a trial basis, and probably we can revisit after the election and see what changes we might ask the province to make?
Through the mayor. So, Councillor, we're going to be monitoring the third-party advertising very closely. It's very difficult for us to know what kind of cases we're going to get. We're going to be analyzing what that looks like and bringing a report forward to council after the election, making some recommendations on a go-forward basis, which may include recommended amendments to the MEA.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Karygiannis. Councillor Perks.
Thank you very much, and thanks to my colleagues for their questions. I've been very concerned about this.
All right, Councillor Perks, just there's still a little bit of that buzz in this room that happens when people are
Just
talking.
people excited to hear me ask questions.
I was thinking the same thing myself. Please proceed.
I've been concerned about this introduction of dark money into our elections since the province first considered this. Have they given us a date for when we can expect their regulations yet?
Through the mayor, they have not given us a date, but we are continuing to put pressure on them because we need to have the regulation and the forms in order for us to move forward with our planning and updating our software system.
Okay. Is it going to be like, I understand there will be some kind of financial rules that, how you can make donations to these third-party advertisers. Whose responsibility is it to monitor that, or will it be to monitor that?
Through the mayor, so the clerk does not have a role to enforce the third-party advertising in the Municipal Elections Act. And the statute actually contemplates the municipality doing that, and that's the language they use. So what we're suggesting in this report is that council authorized the solicitor to retain a third-party legal firm that would essentially be the monitoring body for the third-party advertising, ensuring compliance with the Act and taking action for breaches.
And given that we don't know what those regulations will be or how complex they'll be, how are we deciding how much to allocate to retaining this legal firm?
Through the mayor, so we built in $200,000 in our 18 and in our 19 budget for third-party advertising. We are contemplating that if there's any prosecutions that would require funding, most of those would happen in 19. It's very difficult to know if it's going to be an adequate amount of money. And if it isn't, then the clerk would go forward to council and have a conversation with the city manager to identify a source and ask for an increase as appropriate.
How much money does the City of Toronto spend on compliance just for candidates? Reviewing documents, getting the forms out so people know what the rules are, doing audits, having the audit panel. How much does all of that cost? Ballpark numbers.
Through the mayor, in 2010, we spent approximately about $500,000 on the compliance audit process for candidates, and I think it was slightly less in 2014.
So I'm curious, I'm just imagining a scenario. Let us suppose that the provincial regulations are fairly loose, and it's possible for someone to set up a third-party advertiser called the Friends of Mamaliti, and then his brother to set up a third-party advertiser called the Really Good Friends of Mamaliti, and then their cousin to set up the Exceptional Friends of Mamaliti, and you can donate to all of them, and we wind up with very large amounts of money being spent on this election, possibly even more than what candidates spend. Given that we spend $500,000 just managing the compliance costs for candidates, do you think 20,000 is going to be adequate? Sorry, 200 is going to be adequate.
Through the mayor, we think that 400 may be adequate. You have to remember that the election is end of October in 2018, where we have $200,000 already allocated. So we're surmising that most of the activity related to third-party advertising enforcement is going to occur in 19, which we would carry forward that 200, and it would give us $400,000 really to cover that cost. We did have some conversation with the province related to their third-party advertising enforcement. They've had a regime in place for a number of years, and their volume actually is quite low. Again, it's difficult to know exactly what's going to happen in Toronto, but we feel that $400,000 should be adequate, and if it isn't, we'll go forward and request additional funding as required.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Perks. Members of the committee wishing to ask questions of staff. Councillor Robinson.
Try not to be redundant, but I'm just trying to picture this. So basically, I'll give you an example. Unions can now play a role in this third-party advertising. If they, for instance, don't want us outsourcing garbage east of Yonge, unions could take an active role in trying to oust candidates that are proponents of that. Is that correct?
Through the mayor, unions can participate in third-party advertising as long as they follow the rules laid out in the Municipal Elections Act. That's correct.
So a union that could put out flyers, billboards, any type of marketing material, collateral material against a candidate that was not potentially supportive of outsourcing or some other related matter issue.
That is correct, Councillor.
Is there any way I'm getting a strong vibe around the table that people aren't really proponents of this concept. Is there any way to opt out, or is there any options before us to try to address this?
Through the mayor, no, Councillor. The province of Ontario has put a regime in place in their legislation that the city is required to follow. This was not a scheme that the City of Toronto requested, and in fact, we had very little consultation or input on it. The other comment I would say on your last question around the unions could have done that before. The difference is it's now regulated. So I guess to some extent, they're increasing the transparency of third-party advertising that could have happened in previous elections without any regulatory framework in place.
So if a union went around and picked up van loads of people and gave them granola bars and took them to the election, that will now be transparent? Because that happens, right? We've heard that many times. Takes them to the polling stations.
I don't know if that would meet the definition of third-party advertising in the Act.
Okay.
That particular scenario.
Can I ask you then about the financial, and some of my colleagues have already done that, but will there not be a bit of a ripple effect above and beyond the $200,000 when you're looking at enforcement of this material? And that seems very costly to me when you're dealing with hundreds of candidates across the city.
Through the mayor, again, we feel that we've got really $400,000 allocated for the third-party advertising enforcement because we've built in $200,000 in 18 and another $219. We believe that most of the enforcement activity and any prosecution activity would occur in 19 because the election is so late in 18. And based on the volume that the province gets, we're hopeful that the $400,000 is going to be adequate, and if it isn't, then we would address that at that time as needed.
So I'm just thinking of current campaigns, and there'll be signs that are in medians on streets where they're not supposed to be placed, or there'll be signs being pulled down by other candidates, and you ask staff to act on these things, and it seems to take forever because it's happening all across the city. How are you going to manage all of this above and beyond what's already happening and not being addressed? So if there, let's give an example, a billboard's up there, it's completely inappropriate. How long will it take? What are the timelines till that's going to be taken down?
So I'll speak to the signs enforcement just to clarify that the cost of enforcing against election signs will be through the MLS staff. They will enforce not only the election signs of candidates, but also third-party advertisers. Third-party advertisers using election signs must comply with the rules contained in the chapter that regulates candidates' election signs. So that enforcement cost is separate.
Has that been addressed? That's my question. Has that been addressed? Because currently, it takes forever. If they never get there to address these things because they're completely overwhelmed. It's a big city.
Yeah, so I can't speak to timelines for what the enforcement protocols will be for the election signs enforcement, which would now include third-party advertising signs, perhaps if you have.
Through the mayor, Councillor, I think, we can bring this to the attention of MLS, but they're not here to really speak to that. So I don't know what their service level is related to addressing illegal signs under their bylaw.
Well, that's fine, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Other members of the committee wishing to ask questions? I've got Councillor DeGiorgio, Councillor Ainsley, Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if someone contributes to a third party, does that person also qualify for the rebate?
Through the mayor, third-party advertisers do not qualify for the contribution rebate program.
But someone contributing to a third party? Do they
No,
qualify?
they are not eligible for the contribution rebate program.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor DeGiorgio. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Tory. When are the regulations expected to be issued by the province?
Through the mayor, the province hasn't given us a firm date. They're suggesting likely spring. We're hopeful that we may get them earlier than that. As the clerk said on the last report, we have 16 different applications that automate a lot of our business processes, including the financial contributions of candidates. And we're building in some fields related to third parties, so we're hopeful that we'll get the regulation and any forms they're going to issue before the end of this year, but they have indicated to us it's likely going to be the spring.
So when in the previous item, we talked about election machines and the tabulators and needing them now. If we don't do that now, that could be tight for the provincial election. But we're looking at finance regulations we're not going to see until next spring, correct?
That's correct. So we are building enhancements to our financial reporting system, assuming what we believe may be in there, and we will need to finalize that when the province releases the regulations when they do that.
And one of the things that really stood out to me is that as a municipal candidate, where you can't take corporate donations, but in the report it says third-party advertisers, a corporation which does business in Ontario can donate up to $1,200.
That's correct, Councillor.
Okay, and so then my next question, because there's an example that's very relevant to this, which took place in California, where they had a small mom-and-pop third-party organization that sounded like your neighbor next door, but was actually backed by a billion-dollar multinational company, which effectively overturned 3/4 of their city council. Within these regulations, how do you follow back? So if I have a mom-and-pop, for lack of a better word, third-party organization, how do you determine who they're actually owned by? You can't, can you?
Councillor, I think that would be very difficult to identify. I mean, as long as the mom and pop shop followed the Municipal Election Act and the requirements that are set out, I think it would be difficult for the municipality to know if there's someone behind that bankrolling them.
Yeah. And can you refresh my memory? So the spending limits that are talked about that you're expecting in the regulations, is that going to be a spending limit by ward or citywide for a third-party advertising company?
Through the mayor, we're not sure how they're going to calculate the spending limits, whether on a ward or a citywide basis. We don't have that information from them at this time.
Okay. And then the other thing that stood out to me in the report, so a third party is going to register with the city clerk, but the enforcement is going to be done by the city solicitor.
The report recommends that the city solicitor retain a third-party law firm to do the investigation and enforcement. The clerk administers the election and can't enforce certain aspects at the same time because it would be considered a conflict.
Right, okay. And then when it comes to enforcement, I didn't see any reference in the report at all. And I think Councillor Robinson raised this about MLS. We have a lot of trouble just with where our election signs go, where, whether it's private or public property, and now you're talking about third-party enforcement, which could be putting, hypothetically billions of dollars into a city election, and I didn't see any reference to referencing MLS about enforcement staff increases.
Through the mayor, so the report on page 4 and top of page 5 does set out the MLS role related to the city's sign bylaw. So it is included, and I agree with you, it is a large component. We have not had a conversation with MLS yet around service levels, but given it's been raised here today, I'm happy to do so.
Okay, and you don't need direction, a motion to do that?
No, I don't believe I do.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mayor Tory.
Thanks, Councillor Ainsley. Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just following up on Councillor Robinson's questions about an opt-out provision, looking over a couple of the policies that the City of Toronto has adopted over the years regarding elections. Corporate donations we do not accept. Is that a province-wide policy, or is that a made-in-Toronto policy?
Through the mayor, so the bylaw to restrict corporate donations to candidates was actually a Toronto policy, and the province believed it was such a great practice, they've now included it in the Municipal Elections Act as a province-wide policy.
Right, but Toronto clearly opted out of the corporate donations aspect of the Municipal Elections Act as a leader in that way. The donation rebate program, is that province-wide, or is that once again a made-in-Toronto initiative?
The contribution rebate program is province-wide. Sorry, if the municipality and the council chooses to do it, it's not mandatory. As you saw earlier, you had a choice, so it's a discretionary.
You didn't really answer the point is that it's an opt-in or an opt-out program.
That's correct, but the third-party advertisement is not an opt-in, opt-out.
I mean,
it is a mandatory program in the Act.
Well, many people are feeling very uncomfortable about this before us, the third-party advertising. And since there are precedents for opting in or opting out on provisions of the Municipal Elections Act, why would it not apply in this case as well?
So I'll answer that one. It is a mandatory provision. The MEA does set out the regime. It is compulsory. Individuals who are third-party advertisers are going to be captured by this regime. I do want to note that prior to this, these amendments coming into force, third-party advertisers could participate in municipal elections without any restrictions. So this is actually something that we view as new restrictions on a charter-protected right for third parties to express their democratic views in elections.
Well, wouldn't you agree that we're more legitimizing it and encouraging it rather than really hyper-regulating it?
I'm not sure that I can answer that question other than to say, yes, there are now formal rules around the advertisement, so it provides official recognition that it's going to occur in the regime that's set out.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pasternak, I didn't have any other people on my speakers or my questioners list at this moment. To speak. Okay, so we will move to speakers then, and we'll first have any of our visiting colleagues speak, and I have Councillor Perks, and we'll go from there. Councillor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm deeply concerned about this. And to Councillor Pasternak's point, yes, it's true that there weren't regulations before, but because it was a gray area and no one really knew what the rules were, members of council were all extraordinarily cautious. And if some group of people came forward and said, we really love what you're doing, we'd love to put up signs saying vote for you, we would discourage it because we were concerned that that would get added on to our total and that we would go over our spending limit. So there was a sort of informal regulatory thing happen because it was gray, and everyone running for council was very concerned that they not have someone else spend money that would be counted under their limit. And that was sort of a self-policing mechanism. With these new rules, however, the door is wide open. And I'm very concerned that we don't have the regulations in place, and I'm further concerned that it opens the door again to corporate and union donations. It's a matter of some pride for us here at the City of Toronto that we were among the first to bring those restrictions in, and it's now being replicated province-wide and in many other jurisdictions as well. It's one of the very many instances of the City of Toronto being a leader on ethical, open, and transparent elections. And I think that this new regime the province is bringing in could be a giant step backwards for us. We find ourselves, however, in a position where we're wrestling with jello. We don't even know what the rules will be. So, Mr. Mayor, I don't know if there's a motion in this or anything, but I would encourage you to very strongly signal to staff that when we do get the regulations, we all need to, as a government, sit down and say, how do we make sure that voters have maximum transparency to figure out where the money's coming from, that candidates have very clear rules, and that Torontonians are able to vote in another transparent, open, and honest election like the last several that we've had. And I encourage you to turn your mind to that, Mr. Mayor. I don't have a deadline because the province hasn't offered one, but I think this is of very deep importance to the City of Toronto. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Perks. Others, did you have your hands up, Councillor Lee? Yeah, please.
So I think this is going to be very interesting in terms of how this unfolds. I mean, here you've got a system already in place that allows for third parties to advertise. They're regulating it, so now we know who they're going to be, and that's a positive side to this equation, I think. And we've had hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of this happening in the past. I can recall Councillor Karen Stintz getting elected because the local ratepayer association decided to go after her, right? That's third party. I would imagine that ratepayer associations have been doing this forever. What is wrong with that? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's been happening forever. So I could see some negative sides to this, Mr. Mayor, and I could see some positive sides to this. Councillor Perks mentions Friends of Mamalidi. I'd be willing to bet, that's not something anybody has to worry about, even though I know a few people around the city. But I'd be more inclined to say there's going to be a hell of a lot more socialist pot parties and basements going on, trying to figure out who's going to pay for the next sign or the next ousting of some right-leaning councillor. I think that's going to happen more than Friends of Mamalidi getting together. I think if anything, Councillor Perks' comments are typical about how he doesn't like it. But I can assure you that there's going to be a lot of people like Councillor Perks who are going to actually encourage the unions to get their billboards up and try and oust the people that have voted in favor of certain things. And there's nothing wrong with that because it's democracy. It's what it's about. I will be encouraging developers, for instance, and real estate agents and all the people that seem to be calling our office about the taxes that seem to be going on, the land transfer taxes, the fact that kids can't buy homes anymore. I would encourage them to do that this election and bring out how people have voted on taxes in the City of Toronto. I think everybody should have an opportunity at talking about who should be elected and who shouldn't, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's done tactfully. I don't necessarily disagree with this. I see a lot happening this election, Councillor Perks, and I think we both know that. It might be a little fun, actually, to see whether or not a whole new industry can finally find enough courage to go after certain people on council so they don't get reelected again, and to stop spending people's money like it grows on trees, right? I would hope that would happen, but I don't know. But it's happening already to a small degree. It's going to be large this time around because it's legitimized. This is what it's doing, is legitimizing what's been secret all these years. So let's bring out all our friends, Councillor Perks, and see where the billboards go with that. And let's see where, you know, where those socialist, communist parties end up in the middle of basements somewhere to decide on who's going to pay for what.
Did you leave out the pot part? Didn't you say socialist pot parties earlier on? Anyway, never mind. You don't have to answer that question. Okay, that was okay. We have. I don't think we have any other visiting members of council. So there are other members of the committee wishing to speak. Councillor Robinson. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I have a joint motion. Councillor Pasternak and I worked on this together, and it may end up in the shredding bin at the province, but we thought we'd give it a shot. And you can hear from the comments around the room and the speeches, or most of them, that people are uncomfortable with this. I think that generally we have fairly clean elections, municipal elections in Toronto for the most part, but there are some campaigns that are a bit more challenging. But I think this just ups the ick, ups the dirt, and I can't really find the word to explain it, except to say that I don't think this is a good way forward. I think this is a step back. And I think all of us around this table know that things aren't regulated. That's our insider's knowledge is, unfortunately, you can say what you want on paper, but the reality is on the street, during the campaign, during elections, things are not regulated because there just isn't the resources to regulate them. So I think this opens the doors to unions, developers, corporations, influencing the vision of the city by influencing councillor votes. And I'll give you an example. A number of real estate agents who are very powerful in the city or you know, very, you know, have deep pockets could easily work together to tackle a councillor that was maybe pro-heritage. That's kind of a micro example, but it could be much bigger than that. So I understand what staff are saying. They're saying, well, actually, this is good news. They're regulating it. But I think Councillor Pasternak's comments were on the money as we're formalizing it. And I don't think councillors sitting around this horseshoe or in the chamber should be beholden to any organization. We should all be here for the City of Toronto and the future of the city, not for unions, not for developers, not for corporations. So I think this is a big step backward, and I don't think we should find any way possible to opt out of this, and we should send that message on behalf of executive as well as City Council, and send that message and make sure it's loud and clear to the province that we don't want to go down this road.
Thanks, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to speak for a minute to support the motion before us for the City of Toronto to opt out of the third-party advertisement clauses of the Municipal Elections Act. When the province receives the letter, they'll probably say, well, if we give it to Toronto, then we have to give the opt-out option to all municipalities, and I think that's just fine. This is probably the second or third time that a staff report has come before either council or this committee on third-party advertisement, and I think it's a big mistake to go down this road. We do not have the resources to regulate it. It will start bringing some big money into campaigns. We've seen in the Republic to the south what happens when PACs and big money gets involved in campaigns. The cynicism sets in, the corruption sets in. People are being swayed by deceptive advertising approaches. This is just going to be a mess, and we're going to regret going down this road. We're going to regret supporting it, and I think at the end of the day, we have to keep the status quo. Let candidates go out into their various wards to speak on the issues, to take the stands, to use the very strict budgets that they have to run their campaigns, and not let third parties start hijacking the democratic process. I would say I might benefit from this kind of policy, but I still think it's wrong. And I think we should do what we can in the months ahead to make sure that the City of Toronto, once again, as in corporate donations and the donation rebate program, shows leadership with an opt-out provision in the Municipal Elections Act. And we should make clear by supporting Councillor Robinson's motion. Thank you.
Others wishing to speak? I want to say a word on this if there's no others. I've been sort of thinking about, and let me start the clock, whether you're better off to vote for or against this, but I want to just explain why I'm probably going to vote against the motion made by Councillor Robinson, and that is, and I share a lot of the concerns expressed around the table by Councillor Perks and others about this, and my main concern about it is the fact that, as usual with these things that happen with the province, we're sort of getting this at the last minute. We didn't ask for it. We weren't really consulted on it. And I, just as recently as this morning, was talking about the cannabis, the new cannabis regime, and the fact, I said to all the assembled mayors and the premier who was there, who's going to get all the calls about cannabis to do with people smoking in places they shouldn't be or stores where they're not supposed to be? We're going to get them all. And I was really speaking there to the question of money, and like so many other things, we are affected directly, of course, by this law that was changed without really any consultation with us. But what I want to say is simply this, and somebody acknowledged it earlier on, I think it was Councillor Robinson herself, with respect to ratepayers. I look at it actually as a small step forward, albeit that I have real concerns about the fact there wasn't consultation. We don't even know some of the parameters of this, because I believe today I'd be correct in saying there is nothing stopping much bigger money than this from getting involved in the campaigns, because at least with this, you have, as you see in the report here, the rules that are out say that no contributor, and the contributors do include corporations and unions, so in that sense it's inconsistent with what applies to candidates, and correctly and rightly so. I mean, I'm happy with the fact that we don't have corporations and unions contributing here, but they can contribute $1,200 to one third party and not more than $5,000 to multiple third parties. And I believe I've been right in saying if somebody wanted to form up one of these groups tomorrow and get one contribution of $100,000 or $1 million from somebody, they could do that. And so in this sense, at least this represents a step forward in saying there are going to be restrictions placed. I have all the same questions about how we're now going to suddenly be trying to enforce that, as well as all of our own rules that have to do with candidates. And the other thing that is going to come forward, and again, I just think it is unacceptable that it would be coming forward as late as I think I heard the answer this spring, but there's going to be a spending limit. So right now I believe it would be possible for some group to form up and to not only take huge donations from wealthy individuals, corporations or unions, big donations, but also to spend millions of dollars without anybody regulating them. And so I think in that sense, when there is a limit, I don't know what it's going to be because it's coming from the province. And again, I find that passing strange that they just set that limit and we have nothing to say about it. But I think that whatever the limit is, it'll be an improvement on no limit. And so I'm inclined to believe that while I'm not happy with the way this has been handled, I actually believe that this represents a step forward against exactly what Councillor Robinson and Councillor Pasternak spoke about, which is the sort of Wild West where anybody can go out and sort of try and buy and sell elections. I don't mean buy and sell candidates, buy and sell elections by spending huge amounts of money. I believe the United States system, you know, sort of the heartland of democracy, has been tragically distorted by money, and that our rules up here generally in Canada, I tell Americans about what we're faced with in terms of spending limits and donation limits, and they sort of, how can you possibly run an election? I said, well, it's worked for many years now, very successfully. And down there, I think that while they still have elections, they're grossly distorted by money in these PACs and all these other things. I don't even understand how they all work, frankly, but I just know it distorts the process. So I will vote against the amendment for that reason only, that I think actually this, as much as I don't like the methodology and the way it's come about, the process, I think actually does represent some improvement on what today could be a huge hole in these rules related to the participation of third parties, you know, whether they're bona fide or not. So those are my comments. And I think if there are no other speakers, we'll call the question first on the motion by Councillor Robinson, which we'll put up here for you. On this motion, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion, I think, is lost. I think there were 3 in favor, and it's lost. Then on the item 27.4, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, thank you all very much. That would bring us then to 27.5, commemorating world events. Report on recognizing genocides and massacres. There are two deputants on that, and the first is Caleb Mabano, President, Rwandan Community Abroad.
What is this issue?
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
And welcome to the Executive Committee, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. For the record, my name is Caleb Mabano. I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So for the record, my name is Caleb Mabano. I represent the Rwandan community here in Toronto. We are here this morning specifically to seek clarity and also to share insights, because this motion strictly impacted how we commemorate the genocide against Tutsi. So first of all, there's two issues that are being looked at. One is recognizing the genocide and also the commemorative events. From a global perspective, Honorable Council and the Mayor, the United Nations designated specifically April 7th as a reflection and honor of the victims of the genocide. Now, that has been the precedent, and every other member nations have been encouraged to follow the suit. Now, on Canada's level, we really commend the steps that have been taken by the federal government. The Canadian government, since 2004, recognized April 7th to commemorate the genocide against Tutsi. And in 1999, the Canadian Extradition Act and other legislation were adopted. In 2000, Canada enacted Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act, which authorizes the initiation of proceedings in Canada for these offenses, even if they were committed abroad. In 2015, the Canadian Parliament anonymously adopted Motion M587, and this calls for subsequent governments to honor the victims of all genocides by recognizing the month of April as a Genocide Remembrance, Condemnation, and Prevention Month. So what we have today, obviously, was confusing for us, because the Rwandan community has, for the last almost 10 years, had the privilege to commemorate by raising the Rwandan flag here at the City Hall on April 7th. It was not until this year that, when this motion came into place, we were absolutely told without notice that we couldn't commemorate and raise the flag at the City Hall. So we came here today specifically to share the importance, what this means to us as a community, and also to share the insights on what the report says. For us, commemorating genocide on April 7th goes to the heart of the survivors, who make a big number of the community here in Toronto. It is a moment for us to grieve. It is a time that we come together to commemorate the loved ones, but it's also a moment where we have other communities within Toronto that join us and support the healing process. We commemorate publicly, and we believe when we do so, we are reaffirming the Never Again slogan that was adopted years ago. We are also doing this to ensure that we are educating the Canadian society that we are sharing, and also making sure that genocide is something that we take seriously. I have no doubt that the City of Toronto believes the same way. However, when we read the motion that we have on the table today, we were concerned because the motion specifically combines genocide, massacres, and other violent acts in one box. Honorable Council, I would like to highlight that this is very concerning because genocide is intentional, it's planned, and it's executed. Other violent acts or massacres may be spontaneous and can also be random. So we do urge the City Council to consider the magnitude of genocide and how we standardize not to put these together because they don't mean the same.
Just, I'll have to ask you to wrap up just a couple more sentences. We're just at 5 minutes now.
So
Thank you.
what we are asking today, Honorable Council and Mayor, we are asking that you allow us to continue to be able to commemorate on April 7th here at the City Hall. We also ask that you consider designating a public place where we could display, we could talk, we could share with the community here. It's very important to us. And we also
I'll have to stop you there, sir, because just we're at 5:40 now, so I thank you very much. We have to be fair to everybody here in terms of the time. Thank you very much, and there'll be some questions, I know, so that'll give you a chance to say some more. And we have, the first questioner is Councillor Karygiannis.
Good morning, and thank you to enlighten us on this tragedy that happened in your country. Through the mayor to you, you were able to raise the flag for how many years before you were not able to do it this year?
It was 5 years in a row.
So for 5 years in a row, we were allowing you to raise your flag to commemorate what happened in Rwanda. We're allowing you to commemorate the fact that Canada had an important role to play. There was a senator, Senator Dallaire, that was the UN, and he suffered from PTSD. He's a very recognized individual. And then this year, we told you you couldn't raise the flag.
That is absolutely correct.
Did we give you a reason why you couldn't raise the flag?
It was this motion that brought me here today. It was absolutely not.
This motion that we got in front of us did not allow the Rwandan community to raise the flag to commemorate and remember the genocide in Rwanda.
That is correct, Mr. Councilor.
Let me ask one more time for the people to hear this. This motion, that although United Nations, although the government of Canada, and nobody in the world doubted what happened in Rwanda, did not allow you to commemorate what happened in Rwanda. The City of Toronto stepped up and says you couldn't raise your flag, you couldn't commemorate, and we disregarded what happened. Would I be correct?
That is very correct, Honorable Councilor.
I will not ask any more questions, Mr. Mayor. This is a real shame.
Might lead to some questions of staff, but you've finished with the deputant, and thank you. Do we have other people wishing to ask questions of the deputant? Visitors or members of the committee? Okay, well, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Then we would move to questions of staff. Councillor Karygiannis? I'm sorry.
Thank
Oh,
you.
I apologize, Councillor Karygiannis. There's one more deputant, so we'll hear that and then move to questions of staff. We have Miroslav Glavich. Good morning, sir. You know the rules. 5 minutes. Welcome.
Can I start?
It's on.
Okay. My one concern is here is just recognition of only violent world events. Who's going to decide what violent is? How many people have to die at an event? Through Councillor Karygiannis, when he was an MP, the Armenian genocide was recognized, and I think the one in Sri Lanka. Yeah, a couple more. To some people, there's no definition of, oh, only 10,000 people died. A lot of people died in a lot of other worlds, including my country in Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia during the 90s, and that has never been recognized. How many people died in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, you know? A life is a life is a life. If any of you grew up in a war zone like I did when I was 5, you will know this. When only certain genocides get recognized by the city, it could easily be interpreted that the city thinks the people that don't get recognized are inferior and that we don't matter. This limitation, if you're going to recognize a genocide or a violent event, kind of like the Rohingya in Myanmar going right now, you should recognize all of them with all due respect. A life is a life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glavich. Any questions of the deputant? Thank you very much. Now, we could move to questions of staff, and I had Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you. Through you to staff, we were allowing the Rwandan community to raise their flag on commemoration of the genocide for how many years?
Mr. Mayor, if I might clarify, the request that we got last year for the flag raising was held until we could bring this report and a policy forward to council. That is the only reason. Under the policy that is before you, it would actually be authorized, and it would be covered under this policy.
Sorry, let me ask my question again through the mayor to staff. How many years did we allow them to raise their flag before you had this policy? The deputy said 5. Would that be correct?
Through the mayor, we believe it's 5 years. I don't have the exact figures here, but we believe it is correct. The deputant was correct, 5 years.
So by us asking you to write this report and authored by whoever authored it, we tied your hands and you were not able to allow them to raise their flag. Would that be correct?
Mr. Mayor, we were in the process of doing our research at that point, and we were looking across the country, and we're trying to determine exactly how this should work. What we learned was that genocide is actually there's an international court definition, and we needed to make sure that it could be brought under a policy. And in fact, what we learned was that this approach to the policy would cover this.
Sorry, I'm going to ask my question one more time. Because we asked you to look at the report and you diligently went after this, the community was not allowed to raise their flag. Would I be correct in that?
Pending the preparation of the report, yes.
So we as a body here asked you to do this, and we did not allow this community to raise their flag. And, you know, I'm not going to go any farther. The author that did this is just atrocious. Thank you.
Are there other questions of staff? Could I just follow on that? Because I'd like to ask it a different way. I think the point that Councillor Karygiannis was getting at is we had allowed it for a number of years based on no policy. But I think, did I understand you correctly, Madam Clerk, to be saying that under the policy that this would have been allowed because there has been official parliamentary or Government of Canada recognition of the Rwandan genocide. Is that correct?
Yes, this is recognized by the Government of Canada as a genocide and would be commemorated. That's correct.
The other approach we could have taken is to say, well, in light of that, we could have allowed it one more year until this policy was passed and then govern it under this policy. But we could have, that was an option that was open to us, I presume.
Correct.
So a decision was taken by public servants, and it is what it is. But I guess I just wanted to clarify that was an approach we could have taken, which I think is what you were getting at. And it would have allowed this year's ceremony to take place. Okay. Are there other questions of staff by any?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going through the report here, and I'm just wondering how this affects motions to council declaring certain historical violent events as genocide or crimes against humanity.
They would be covered by the policy and would follow the Parliament and Government of Canada's policies and recognitions. And they would also be recognized during the month of April.
So if a member brought a motion to council to declare a certain historical event, genocide, it would be out of order unless the Parliament of Canada had already recognized that historical event as genocide or crimes against humanity. Or
Subject to council's making an exception. Yes, that's correct.
okay, so council could override, what, with a 2/3 vote? It could override what's in this report, or?
Yes, council makes exceptions to many of its policies from time to time when it's appropriate.
And is this an inference that whatever the Parliament of Canada passes, we agree with, or do we deviate from it? Can we have our own say, or what is, I'm trying to think what the connection is between one legislative body and another on a declaration of this nature.
The connection, Councillor, is actually the reason that the particular individual who moved this motion had concerns about. And that is that the federal government and Parliament are recognized as the government and the level of government in our Constitution that is responsible for international and global affairs. Hence, we have relationships with consulates and others that are based on that relationship.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pasternak. If there are no other questions of staff, we can move to speakers. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And certainly your asking staff of the explanation was one way of looking at it. The other way to look at it is that we denied a community that was butchered. We denied a community for 5 years that were raising their flag because this was being authored by staff and no fault of the staff. However, I would say there was the fault of the people of the person that actually brought the motion forward. They should be ashamed of themselves. We denied the community to raise their flag. Time and time again in this chamber, we remind other levels of government that what they're doing is wrong. Time and time again in this chamber, we ask the city manager and or the city clerk to write to other governments and say, look, what you're thinking and what you're doing is wrong. And yet in this one, we are going in reverse and we're saying we're going to follow the federal government, which is a good thing, but that shouldn't stop us from listening to our communities. That shouldn't stop us. We're on the ground level here. This council is on the ground level. I had the pleasure of serving federally for 26 years, and on this ground level, you listen more to constituents, you're more engaged. This will deny constituents that come forward to us and say, we want to have a commemoration, we want to have a remembrance, we want the city council to engage. And I don't think this is appropriate. I don't think this is appropriate that we say that we're going to follow the federal government on this one. Well, on other issues, we take it in reverse role and we write to them. This is a legislative body on its own. We should be able to make our own decisions. We shouldn't be influenced by other levels of government, as we're not. We should take guidance, but to stay strictly because our level of government is doing this, that we have to follow it. I urge members around this table to receive this for information, and let us continue the work that we're doing with our communities. Just because one person got their shorts tied in a knot because somebody else seconded the motion, that shouldn't constitute that we forget, we dismay, and we automatically just say to the communities, sorry, we can't deal with your request, we can't entertain you to come and speak to us. That is not right. This council passed a motion which a community was working on for decades, and it affected me personally. And I want to thank them for doing this. But moving forward, that community couldn't come here and do this. It was because of the motion that was passed here that the Senate at this very moment is having the conversation to recognize the Pontian Greek genocide. It was because of the initiative that we took in this body that they have now the fortitude and the backbone in order to do it. What happens if the Jewish community, at the time that we were studying this, was to step forward and say, we want to raise a flag in order to commemorate? What would we have told them? I'm sure it would not have been the same thing that we told their Rwandan community. And yet, the Rwandan community that was small community in Toronto were sucker punched because of this motion. If it was the Jewish community or any other community with large numbers, would have been different. And yet, we did it to them. I think, Mr. Mayor, we need to apologize and respect them for what happened to them. This decision of ours to move forward with this report tied the hands of staff in order for them to allow to raise their flag. And here we have one of the latest genocides that occurred in this world with this council and the decision that we took, tying the hands of staff and ignoring their request to remember. How shameful is that? How shameful is this to the work that our soldiers, our peacekeeping soldiers, the Canadian soldiers that we had there, the work that they did? And what does that say to the memory of the people that passed away? We ignored you. We, the City of Toronto, failed you. We just don't think that we recognize the Rwandan genocide. That's what it speaks to. Mr. Mayor, I'm going to stop there, and I would ask you, sir, to consider from your office to certainly apologize to the community because of what we did to staff by tying their hands, and the people could not commemorate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Karygiannis. So we're now on speakers from visiting members. I don't think there are any others in the room that wish to speak, so we'll go to the members of the committee wishing to speak. Councillor McMahon. Oh, I'm sorry. I did have the Deputy Mayor down first, so you're quite right. And I have Councillor Burnside, too. And I have Councillor McMahon after that, so please.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to speak in favor of the report. One of the reasons is because I'm the guy that asked for it. From what's been going on here, so there needs to be some sort of context put into this report. The words genocide and massacre come with significant implications. They're big words, and they have big meanings to them, and we shouldn't be recognizing these things lightly or easily. Yet here at the City of Toronto, we don't really have a framework for making those decisions, nor do we have the capacity to completely understand all the impacts and whether we should be doing this or not. In fact, I remember that the reference that Councillor Karygiannis made, it was just made on a notice of motion. There was no debate, no discussion. It was just hands up, hands down. And I'm really not sure that we actually really understood what all members of council understood what that meant. So the other thing is as this continues, as we're going to have more information come in front of us, staff don't have the capacity to decide these things and evaluate these things. They don't have people in other countries. They don't have historians. They don't have, they're not international law experts. They don't have. That is not what our staff do. That is not what they do. So we're asking them to write reports that they are not skilled or equipped to write. So here we have in front of us a report that creates some framework around doing this. And I'm also mindful of the fact as well that whenever without a framework for decisions, these things come before committee, and they're very, very long debates with many, many deputants, and also there is a lot of conflict that's created between different groups who are impacted by this. So this particular report creates a framework around this, where we ask the federal that we take advice from the federal government, anything that they recognize that we automatically recognize. So it makes sense from that perspective. Not only does it do that, but if you look at the report, it actually enhances how we recognize these events by declaring each April Genocide Remembrance, Condemnation, and Prevention Month. So there's actually a framework where these things can be properly recognized. So I think this is a great report, and I think that we should go ahead and adopt it.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Van Wong. Councillor Burnside.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I agree that maybe an apology would be in order for the flux that staff went through in trying to figure out this policy. But think to say that it was somehow that we disgraced our military is a little bit over the top. I'd actually ask you not to interrupt me. That is the first thing I'd do, because I had to listen to you, so you have to listen to me. That's how it works. Thank you. But council, in my short time here, I find is constantly asked to wade into issues outside of our jurisdiction. And not so much, my biggest concern with that is that we don't have the research or the resources to actually make informed decisions. Quite often, we're asked to decide on issues, or we have been asked to decide on an issue that occurred 100 years ago. And so quite often, we're making ill-informed decisions. That's why I think this is an excellent report. It gives us some framework, and it should streamline the process and put us in a position where we're recognizing tragic world events, but where we're actually making, I'll say, somewhat informed decisions because we're following the lead of the federal government who has actually done the research. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burnside. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that I think this is a good thing. It makes sense to align with the federal government, and I want to thank Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong for bringing it forward. And I would urge Councillor Karygiannis to stop continually bringing such divisive issues to council to grandstand
Point of order, Chair.
with them.
Point of order. I'm sure I don't have a point of order, but you can't tell me what to do and what to bring to council.
And
I
I
would
guess
urge you. I'm urging. I'm not telling.
that's fine. Thank you very much. Councillor McMahon, continue, please.
Grandstand.
You're all done? All right. Councillor DeGiorgio.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very, very quickly. The benefit of the
Point of
report for
privilege.
me...
Could you stop speaking out, please?
Can we please just maintain a degree of civility in this room? Councillor Karygiannis, please. You had your turn, and so, okay. Now Councillor DeGiorgio is speaking.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I support this report. It's a good report. And the main benefit of the report for me was that we, at least in my recollection, sometimes we had motions coming before us to commemorate the situations around the world where, in fact, other levels of government did not agree. And we were put in a position where, under pressure, that we should commemorate a certain event where, in fact, we would be going against other levels of government. And I think this report basically eliminates those situations for us and basically leaves the decision-making of major events around the world in the hands of the federal government where it belongs. And we would more than gladly follow in the footsteps of the federal government once they've made a decision on certain issues of this nature. So, thank you.
Any other people wishing to speak? All right, then. If not, we're ready to call the question. All those in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 27.7. Let me just find that here. Where have I done with my agenda? There it is. 27.7, which is the CNE Association permit for West Channel water shows. And we have a deputant, Judy Sutcliffe, here with us this morning. Sutcliffe, thank you. Are you participating in the deputation as well?
I'm here in support of Judy.
Okay, well, just if you could identify yourself, that's also a...
Susan Mitchell from Toronto Sailing and Canoe Club.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Okay, so you have 5 minutes, and we thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm a volunteer from the West End Beaches Stakeholders Association, known as WEBSA, which represents 4 clubs and about 5,000 recreational flat water users on the western beaches. WEBSA has been in operation since 2005, but 3 of the 4 clubs that make that up are Argonaut Rowing Club, Boulevard Club, Toronto Sailing and Canoe Club, and the Sunnyside Paddling Club have been there for over a century. WEBSA was established 12 years ago to promote and protect the West End Beaches area in Toronto for multiple flat water users for sport and recreational use. In 2005, Collectively, governments spent $23 million on a 600-meter break wall for the 2006 World Dragon Boat Championships. And in 2009, Council approved the Western Beaches Master Plan, where use of the 4.4 kilometer waterway from Ontario Place to the Humber River be primarily flat water, an area that provides protected water for the quiet enjoyment of thousands of recreational users annually. In advance of the 2015 Pan Am and Para-Pan Am Games that we welcomed, we learned that water ski, wakeboard, and other events were to be held in the West Channel from Ontario Place. We offered our advice on the design of the venue based on our knowledge of the site. We were advised after the fact that there was an intention to establish a legacy for water ski on that site. Now, I'm sure I don't need to tell you, members of council and the executive committee, that there is an incompatibility between high-speed motorboats traveling at 40 kilometers an hour, towing a water skier, and someone in a canoe or a rowing shell. Nevertheless, once we understood from city staff that there needed to be some legacy, we accepted this, and we worked with the representatives of the city and the Water Ski Association in good faith to arrive at an agreed maximum number of days for motorized competition on that site. And in July of 2014, Council voted 38-0 for a motion that there be no more than 10 days of motorized competition annually, commencing 2016. The summer of 2016 was a bit of disaster for flatwater users, as an 80-meter dock was installed just east of the Ontario Place Gap, obstructing free flow of flatwater traffic to Ontario Place, and not removed for 39 days, despite repeated requests. Motorized events took place for the 18 days of the CNE, and details are provided in attachments to the notes that I have submitted. We got agreement in the fall of 2016 that there would be consultation with WEBSA before the next summer, and WEBSA met with the CNE in November of 2016 and clearly described the 10-day maximum of the council resolution. In January 2017, CNE began negotiating an agreement with the city that would bypass the 10-day restriction. Unbeknownst to WEBSA, in late July of 2017, when the CNE was formally advised of the council resolution, they made protestations to the city, and ultimately the acting city manager overruled the 2014 council resolution and granted the CNE an exception on a one-time basis. So, councillors, over 5,000 users are on this course over the course of a week. In addition to club members, countless others launch stand-up paddleboards, kayaks, outrigger canoes, and other flatwater vessels daily. Summer camps are run there where youngsters learn how to row, to sail, and to paddle. People with disabilities are freed from the strictures of their disability by being able to get safely onto the water in a sailboat, rowing boat, canoe, or dragon boat. The 2006 government expenditures of $23 million for flatwater sports venue, the 2009 Western Beaches Watercourse Master Plan, and the 2014 Council Resolution all support flatwater use of the whole course, including the West Channel. But here we are again, facing yet another challenge from the CNE to exempt their operations from this 10-day maximum.
I'll have to stop you there just to ask you to wrap up. We're just past the 5
I've got a couple more sentences.
Okay, that's good, no problem. Thank you.
The CNE has been supportive of us while they continue to press for their 22 days of motorized use. Our only argument is that's twice more than what we agreed to in good faith, and it is inconsistent with the long-term planning for this site. We seek executive committee support in enforcing the 2014 council resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sutcliffe. So questions of the deputant from members outside the committee. Councillor Perks.
Thank you. Judy, so just to go through the history a little bit, when the breakwater was being rebuilt for the Pan Am Games, staff from the City of Toronto consulted with you about the long-term uses?
Well, not initially. It took quite some time until actually the submission was made in July of 2013 to City Council through the Executive Committee that there was going to be a legacy use. And that's when we learned about it, when the staff report came forward. So we had been meeting with them through April, May, and June of that year, and nothing was said about a legacy. And it wasn't until we saw it in the staff report that we then wrote a letter to Council, and that's on the record as well, from WEBSA saying that we could not support the legacy use because it's incompatible with flat water use.
And then after that, you were invited into a process?
And so we then met with City Council, with City Rep staff and with members of the Water Ski Association and negotiated that there should be ultimately a 10-day maximum of motorized water sports taking place on that site. And so that's what we took forward to Council. That's what went to the Parks and Environment Committee. That's what Councillor Shiner asked that there be that be moved to discussion, and then it went forward to Executive Committee and Council.
And then the very first year after the Pan Am Games, that was violated?
The very first year after the Pan Am Games, the 80-meter dock was put in place. It covered almost the entire water course. The flat water users did not have access to that site. And even though we repeatedly requested it be moved to the side, it seemed like it went on for 39 days. And we have that all documented in the submission.
And then after that, there were further conversations with your organization to make sure it didn't happen again. And again, you came to the conclusion of the 10-day use, and city staff said they would support that.
That's correct.
And then the very next year, again, you found out that that wasn't being adhered to.
That's correct.
And your organization has met again, and including, and your membership includes the motorized user, and again sat down and came to the recommendation that it should be a 10-day use.
Yes.
Okay. And you said that there are a variety of day camps, seniors, people with disabilities.
Yes.
Are out there?
Yes.
5,000 water users a week?
5,000 that are members of our clubs, and now yesterday at our WEBSA meeting, we were joined by Toronto Adventurers who have 10,000 users, and that's not taking into account all the casual users who actually arrive on the beach with their canoe or their stand-up paddleboard or their kayak and decide to go for a paddle.
Are there other flat water courses available to these users?
Not readily, not that you can drive to. The only other flat water course is actually on the island, and that's usually programmed.
It's already programmed and permitted.
Yes.
Okay. And you had standing permits that you had correctly applied for this summer that you weren't able to get use of the water for that period.
We had a permit for August 27th for our annual regatta that we've been holding for 30 years. And the regatta normally lasts from 8 a.m. the permit was from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. We were requested by the CNE to truncate that because they had negotiated with the city without taking into account the permits that there would be a World Wakeboard Association Championships held at the same time. So ultimately, we asked them for could we stop at 2 o'clock and then you can carry on with your wakeboard championships, and they said, well, they're angry about this, so we said, okay, how about 1:30? And so, we kept giving up more and more time for our regatta so that they could hold their motorized water sport championship.
And the memberships of your organization, they're citywide?
They are citywide.
And they represent a number of different groups. There's one organization, the Boulevard Club, which is, admittedly more high-end, but some of the other clubs are just ordinary folks who can't afford a cottage and...
Well, Sue here is from the Toronto Sailing and Canoe Club, and they're kind of like the Argonaut Club. They're not exactly well off, and so during this summer where we faced flooding in our clubs, we're going to have to face a substantial financial burden of trying to put them back in order. It's going to be a challenge.
And many of the clubs, run events for kids who can't afford to go to cottage.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Are there other questions from visiting councillors? I don't see any in the room, so we'll move to questions of the deputants by members of the Executive Committee. Are there any questions? Okay. Well, thank you both very much for your deputation and for answering the questions. And that would bring us then to questions of staff. Is that what you... Oh, Councillor Perks, you have questions of staff? Yeah.
I'm not sure if this goes to Parks or Legal or City Manager or who it goes to. The CNE was in negotiations, as they are routinely, about their master land use agreement. Is that?
Through the mayor, that's correct.
That's correct. And in that agreement, they were given certain rights about what they could do on the dry land at Marilyn Bell and Coronation Park.
Through the mayor, that's correct. There's a number of different items in the master agreement. We're one of many divisions that's included in those negotiations, and it includes use of Marilyn Bell Park, Coronation Park, and a number of other areas.
And nothing in the master agreement gave them additional time or gave them time on the water. That's not part of the master agreement.
The water use, the waterway use was not part of the master agreement. In 2016, my understanding was it was through a permit that was issued for its use.
And the CNE had asked for water use to be included in that master agreement, and the City of Toronto told them no.
Through the mayor, that's correct. It was at that time when we were renegotiating the master agreement that the 10-day requirement that was approved by council in 2014 came to bear.
Okay. And it's park staff that support the WEBSA group that was just described there. You have staff who routinely attend that and support that group and work out so that all the different users can come to an accommodation, so that Group A can run their event on a certain day and Group B and so on. That's a city...
Through the mayor, that's correct. It would be park staff as well as our permitting staff who would be involved in that kind of a negotiation.
Right. And the problem this year is that someone in Parks inadvertently agreed to give a permit to the Axe, despite council direction.
Correct. That's the reason for the report before Executive Committee today.
Okay. And I don't know if it's you or planning staff. We have an overall Western Waterfront Master Plan that is based on the principle of giving more access to the general public, to the waterfront. We have a plan in there of building a public docks at Dowling. The basis of it is to try to get more recreation rather than people simply observing. That's the central premise of that plan, isn't it?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Perks. Other questions of staff from members of the Executive Committee? Councillor Thompson.
Just through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Romanoff. Can you give us a little bit of overview on the history of this area? There was a time that I recall where there were not many activities taking place there. Is that correct?
Through the mayor, there certainly hasn't been the type of water show that CNE has been doing for the last few years. As noted in the previous discussions, the improvements to the West Channel were done as part of the Pan Am Games, which then provided, a different type of opportunity for different types of events.
And so obviously we recognize there's been some impact to the community. And what has changed? It's the level of activities, the need for the CNE to have more events there, and what's the impact then on the overall community?
Through the mayor, certainly there's been ongoing use by rowing clubs and other recreational users of the West Channel right on through, even before the improvements were done for Pan Am. What's changed is the CNE's interest in, or the CNEA's interest in staging motorized water shows as part of the CNEA. So that hasn't been included in our negotiations in the master agreement for some time, and that's now come forward because of the improvements that have been done to the West Channel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. Other questions of staff from, oh yes, Councillor Hensey, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. So I'm just trying to understand it. So this past January, council gave authority to the city manager, Parks and Rec, the exhibition place, and the CNEA to negotiate the master agreement.
Through the mayor, I can only speak to the PFNR pieces of it, but that's correct. It's an agreement that's negotiated through legal services on behalf of the city and many divisions that are involved.
Okay, and then my understanding is there's an appendix to the licensing agreement that looks after Maryland Bell Park and also the water channel?
Through the mayor, Maryland Bell Park, yes, correct, not the water channel.
Not the water channel. Okay. And then, so when it comes to the water channel, there's always been, has it been an informal agreement that the CNE can use it for 10 days for events, or is that?
No, the water channel has always been permitted through the regular permitting office in PFNR. So if someone wanted to use the water channel, whether it was non-motorized users such as a rowing club for a regatta, those types of agreements would have to come in through our office to allow that use.
Okay, and if the CNEA wants to use it, they need a permit basically to shut down the channel for their own use?
Anyone that is using the channel would need the agreement through some means, either a permit or through a master agreement or through a license agreement or some form that would give them that authority to use the channel.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Tory.
Thanks, Councillor Ainsley. Any more questions of staff? Okay, well then we can move to speakers, and we'll start with Councillor Perks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I want to begin by apologizing to the clubs, the community clubs, who not once, not twice, but 3 times have negotiated with all the water users down there and worked with city staff to come to agreements about how we're doing it in good faith and had that good faith trampled on. My apologies. The City of Toronto owes you better than that. A mistake was made. Someone who was unaware of the policy issued a permit, and the city made a mistake. However, some voices in this conversation have been acting as if it wasn't a mistake, that actually somebody had said you can go ahead and use it. No, we heard very clearly that the master agreement with the CNE does not grant water access use. It's only for the land uses. I myself, I got a phone call in July from the acting city manager saying, Councillor, we know that you do a lot of work supporting those clubs, which are citywide in nature. We have to tell you a city employee made a mistake, and we're going to have to actually overturn existing permits and existing uses to support the CNE. The distressing thing about this is the CNE, because of the previous year's experience, already knew that they were limited to 10 days. I am distressed that the CNEA and their partners at Exhibition Place went ahead and booked that event and incurred liability to the city should we cancel it when they already knew what the limit was. And that members of our community who put on camps for kids, you know, my own daughters years ago when they were in high school joined a dragon boat competition down there. We have very few opportunities for people who, like my family and many, don't have a cottage or some other way of getting onto the water, have to rely on being able to permit these uses and do it through these clubs. Thousands of people in the City of Toronto who we are trying to encourage to get out onto the water, thousands of them, being inconvenienced by organizations affiliated with the City of Toronto who knew better. It's not good enough. Now, I understand that the Board of Governors of Exhibition Place staff have been working with some members of this executive committee to bring a motion to just grant the CNE the access in the future. Forget about good faith negotiations with other stakeholders. Forget about Council's policy. Forget about our long-term goals for the Western waterfront. Forget about the kids and the seniors and the people with disability who are trying to find somewhere to use the water. Just forget about it all and give it to them. I understand that motion is circulating. I want to ask you this, members. Isn't it worthwhile to put this off for a month and have a chance to finally sit down and have a truly good faith negotiation where people who, don't happen to put on a multi-million-dollar event but provide camps for kids have an equal voice, finally, that this council will take seriously in determining how this very rare and precious resource. There are not a lot of places where you can go and teach a kid how to paddle a canoe or be on a dragon boat team, or where a senior can safely learn how to sail. There are not many places where that can happen. This is one of them. And it's one of them that we, as the City of Toronto, have very carefully controlled and permitted through our park staff for years and years and years. The fact that the CNE suddenly wants to, after I think it's 25 years of not running any motorized events, wants to expand their footprint, okay, we should have that conversation. But we shouldn't just slap down a motion, which frankly the members of these clubs heard about this morning, and override that long process we've had of trying to make sure that everybody has access to flat water in the City of Toronto, not just for-profit events run at the CNE. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and through you to the committee. I have the great honor of serving as Vice President of the CNEA, and I have for the last several years. I also have worked at the CNE, visited the CNE my entire life. I think that a return of the CNE to have a connection to the waterfront on which the exhibition place grounds lie is a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I say that, but with some reservations about the directions that we've heard the Executive Committee are going with for two reasons. And this is the motion that we expect that is coming, for two reasons. One is that we have not had an appropriate dialogue with the other watercourse users. There was no notice given that because of this report, we would be opening up the agreement that was entered into in good faith, and that we would be changing the conditions of it. There was nothing in this report that suggested that. That is something new. That is something that the watercourse users haven't had the benefit of any notice for. I think that is a mistake in the process. I also have, and my second reason is, I have complete faith that I think we can find an alternative that will actually benefit all water users in this case. I think everyone's going to have to give a little bit of something up, but I think people will be able to walk away from the table with something more than they had when they arrived. For the case of the Canadian National Exhibition, I think they may walk away with some agreement that they could have more time in the watercourse. But for the other water users, I think that they will have some certainty that despite the 18-day fair and the 10 days of additional time, which is about half the paddling season, I'll point out, they will be able to ensure that their programming can remain. The problem with moving a motion here that says let's just lift the ban is it doesn't have two things. One, it doesn't have any conditions associated with use for the other users. That means those 18 days are gone, and there's nothing compelling the CNE to negotiate any accommodation. Those 18 days are gone, and the additional 10 days of motorized water sport, and whatever load in and load out days that they have. So we're really looking at narrowing the amount of time that any other water user have. And these are people that have footprints down there as well, and as the CNE does, and some history as well, as of course the CNE does. The other thing, though, I fear from this motion coming today is it creates a lot of bad will, if that's a word. It creates a lot of animosity between the parties in the negotiation. And I think rather than come in and say, let's lift the restriction, and yeah, we'll talk, is we say, let's talk. And let's see if we can come to a compromise. Because I think, like deep down, I actually think we may be able to come up with some unique set of circumstances that everyone can have an opportunity to use the space. And I see an employee now shaking their head about that might not be possible. I'm not sure if that was directed at my comments. But I actually have faith that can happen. And I certainly hope that the Executive Committee would allow that process to, even if it's just for the next 20 whatever days until your next meeting, to give an opportunity for the parties to get together and find some common ground.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. So I think we've had the visiting councillors speak, and we turn to members of the committee. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Grimes has asked me to move a motion for him, and I'm going to do that now. Perhaps I'll ask staff to put it on the screen. I've listened, and I've had a chance to talk, and certainly want to thank the residents for being here. And I realize that there are challenges, both with respect to their concerns as well as those of the CNE. We have made some investment in the area with respect to the changes that have come from the south, the break wall, and a variety of other things that have been done there. There is now an opportunity for additional events to take place, and the CNE has come forward, and clearly through the process that was engaged in, they had, there was a contravention with respect to our own policies. A matter was introduced to resolve it as such in a timely way to permit activities at the CNE. And so there is a desire to consult, but there's also a desire to ensure that there are specific timeframes incorporated in the policy directive as it now stands. One of the things that we are tasked with as part of our responsibility is to make changes, and I realize that it's not always something that we're happy with, but with this motion, there's an opportunity for the General Manager of Parks, Recreation, and Forestry to consult with as part of the master agreement process that will take place. There's an opportunity as well that the General Manager will review the annual undertaking of the activities at the CNE, and again to consult with the affected users and the residents as a whole. So I think, and I try to ask the question before both of the staff and others who are quite familiar with this issue in terms of how did we arrive at the number of days in terms of the total maximum number of days? I can't seem to get a straight answer with respect to that. And so while this particular facility was not utilized in a very active way prior to the investments that's been made in making the necessary changes in the area, the changes has now created an opportunity for the newly constituted CNE and so on and some of the activities. And I understand that the activities are well attended and so on. And so I think that there's an opportunity for us to continue to engage with respect to the different groups that are impacted by the desire of the CNE to have more events, more motorboat type of events and competitions. I think this is a good thing for the city. I realize it has impact to the residents and users there, but I think that's something that can be worked out, and then that's an opportunity that has availed the parties through this particular motion. I had hoped that we could have deferred this for some time, but apparently the appetite of that wasn't there, and so I'm moving this motion on behalf of Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Are there other members of the committee wishing to speak? I do, but I just was actually preparing a little motion here. I can give you what I've done. There are no other people wishing to speak? Okay. First of all, I want to begin by saying that I do think in the circumstances this matter was not well handled, I think. And I just want to extend the same apology, because I think when we make a mistake, we should just say we're sorry that it happened the way it did, because I think it's some kind of a Keystone Cops episode where we didn't do things the way we should have in the context of both an existing policy, whether people knew about it or not. I guess they should have, and that's fine. I mean, people make mistakes. I want to go on to say that I'm going to support the motion, but I'm going to move, and I didn't quite finish it there, that there be a direction from this committee before the council meeting on October the 2nd, that there be a meeting involving officials of the CNE, Exhibition Place, the city, and other stakeholders as appropriate. And I can't name all of those. We've had some in front of us today, and I'm happy that should include other people as people wish, with a view to trying to see if there can be something that goes, because I'm concerned about the fact this is a blanket exemption, and that if you take it as being then 18 days of the CNE plus 10 days where there could be other people, that is quite a few days. I'd originally thought that what was happening here was we were just saying to the CNE, during your 18 days, you can put on shows, which I wouldn't have been troubled by as much, because the CNE, and they don't, we've proven by what we've heard even this morning, that when they had events, the clock stopped, but I'm not going to take that much longer. When they had events, they were willing to negotiate even a partial use of the day. So they had the motorized show, as it's called, in the afternoon, and the Argonaut Rowing Club or whoever used it in the morning. And so I think there could be something here that could be better than what is in this motion. But I will say this. I hope originally there was I understood there was going to be this meeting. I think by putting it right into the resolution of the Executive Committee, we require it to happen by directing that it should happen. And I hope that it will be a meeting that happens in good faith. And I will say this. In the event that they can't reach some resolution that is different than what is here, I will change my vote at the City Council. I'm saying that right now. Because I do think the blanket exemption is too much in the context of a shared resource that we have, and it's precious, and there's only kind of one of them in the place that it is. I saw people out there just the other night when I was out at an event in the West End. So I will make that motion, and the clerk is probably very helpfully able to conclude it, I think, more or less, or I can help her, and then we can deal with this. If I can have your indulgence for one moment. Yes. Oh, okay. So I'm just going to finalize the wording because I was just about finished it at the time. Let's see if there can be an resolution. Alternative resolution. That's it. And report. Yeah. To the council meeting. It says. Yeah. So I think that's what we've come up with there. I think that Councillor Thompson, is this? If you just have a look there at what's up there and see if that, since you're going to treat it as a, okay? All right, so we'll add that then as a friendly amendment, and we can vote then on the whole thing. Well, do we have to still vote on the amendment or not?
Mayor Tory, there's some question clarification.
I'm sorry, sure.
General manager.
Parks, Forestry, and
We can put that in too if you wish, just to be perfectly clear, which general manager? Any other questions of clarification? And was there another amendment to this? Oh, yes, there's the amendment of Councillor Thompson, so we'll incorporate these and deal with these two with your indulgence, members, together. So it's all one amendment now. This one is incorporated into Councillor Thompson's motion, so it all is treated one if you're...
Two screens.
Two screens, okay, two screens. So we're going to call one question on the amendments and then on the item. On the amendments taken together, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And then on the item as amended, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. So that brings us at quarter past. I guess we can get started. The next item is the Toronto Ravine Strategy 27.8, and it has a number of deputants. It has 14 deputants. May I just ask of the deputants, I apologize because we will break for lunch at 12:30, and so we'll break up getting started on this, but we might as well get started. I was just asked, I just do see a number of people, and of course you're quite entitled to be heard if you want, but I see, for example, 3 people from TRRS. I see a couple from BENA, the Bloor East Neighborhood Association. If you can come up together, I'm usually willing, with the concurrence of my colleagues, to allow sort of more than 5 minutes, but less than 10, just in the interest of keeping us moving along, if you have the same thing to say, but I'll leave it to you. You're listed here separately, so you're entitled to speak separately if you wish. And on that note, we'll hear from the first 2 or 3 before lunch, and the first deputant is Susan Aaron. Susan Aaron here? Okay. We'll move to number 2 then. Jason Ramsey Brown, Toronto Field Naturalists. Hello, Mr. Ramsey Brown. Welcome.
Thank you.
You have 5 minutes, and please go ahead.
So thank you for the opportunity to address you all today.
The Toronto Field Naturalists have spent 94 years connecting people with nature in Toronto, helping them to understand, enjoy, and protect our green spaces and the species that inhabit them. From our opening of the first urban nature trail in Canada in 1931, to our ravine studies in the 70s, to our work on the city's Ravine Strategy Advisory Group last year, we've always believed that our ravines are the heart of Toronto's identity and inspire the souls of its citizens. TFN is very enthusiastic about the ravine strategy. Its principles represent a much-needed vision for these remarkable natural areas, a vision that, in unambiguous language, identifies the preservation and restoration of nature as being of paramount importance. TFN implores the Executive Committee to immediately empower the meaning and intent of the ravine strategy by amending motions or introducing committee recommendations that would strengthen Toronto's commitment to the preservation and restoration of nature in our ravines. To this end, we propose 3 recommendations for your consideration. Number 1, expedite and expand the development of management plans for environmentally significant areas. In the face of the city's predicted population growth and the increased use of our ravines encouraged by the strategy, 3 plans in the first 5 years, with the remainder over a decade away, is wholly inadequate in ensuring the protection of these vital natural areas. Recommendation 2, call for the immediate expansion of the city's community stewardship program and the integration of Friends of groups in the city's stewardship plan. Stewardship is one of the few actions that supports all 5 guiding principles of the strategy concurrently by applying investment directly to protection through activities that both celebrate and connect people and partners to our natural heritage. Recommendation 3, request a plan to secure a per capita expenditure for ecological preservation and restoration through a stable and dedicated source of funding. The funding could be based on a model similar to the third-party sign tax used to fund art and culture in the city. Toronto has earned the title world-class city, but has done so based on criteria where vibrant nightlife and a major league sports franchise were enough to earn you that moniker. The very definition of world-class city is changing. In the future, we will be judged as such not only by the height of our skyscrapers, but the height of our trees, not just by the diversity of our festivals, but the diversity of our native species, not just by our built environment, but by our natural environment. To retain our standing as a world-class city, we must strive to be more than just a city within a park. We must become a city at one with our natural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramsey-Brown. And I think if you're willing, there were some questions coming from Councillor Davis.
Hi, thank you very much for coming. I didn't hear you very clearly about your first recommendation, but I think it was about implementing the ESA plan. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, the strategy says that management plans should be done for all ESAs. At the back of the strategy, it talks about projected timing, and it basically says 3 done in the first 5 years, with the remainder done up to a decade later. With the amount of pressure that's going to be building on the ravines due to population increase, but also due to the strategy itself, encouraging this celebration of the ravines, encouraging our connection with the ravines, that timetable is too slow for something so precious.
Okay, so what you're saying is the ravine strategy encourages greater use and celebration of the ravines, and yet the protection of those environmentally sensitive areas will not be complete. In other words, it's a bit out of sync?
Yeah, our concern is certainly that with the increased pressure, these areas become more threatened. And at present, the amount of protection that they're afforded may be insignificant, or may be not reasonable for the amount of pressure that they may find themselves under.
Okay. And you talked about some unique revenue sources, and you used the sign tax as
the third
example.
Yeah. Well, my understanding, and I'm not well-versed in all the ins and outs, but my understanding is that art and culture in the city has dedicated funding. And the problem with a lot of the ecological protection and restoration work that's been done is it's done very project by project. It's not necessarily given the same level of support that we give for things like art and culture. A great example I've heard over time is it's much easier to sell through some sort of novelty and feature that comes with restoration work as opposed to selling through the restoration work itself, whether that's with philanthropic donation or whether that's through funding from other organizations. If we're going to protect these spaces, we really need to make sure that restoration and protection is considered something worth funding in and of itself.
Okay, and what I found striking in this report were the recommendations that were attached to it that have to do with setting up, a philanthropic way to finance. In particular, these nodes or special areas, gateways. You're saying that kind of financing is not the kind of financing that we need for ongoing maintenance and preservation of the environmental, to protect the environmentally sensitive areas in our ravines.
I think with any kind of voluntary funding through philanthropic means, for example, it's really up to the motivations of the person giving the money, what they're willing to invest in and not.
Yes, you often...
Based on the experience that I've had and people I've spoken to, getting somebody to invest in a piece of art is easy. Getting them to invest in the planting of a whole bunch of wildflowers as butterfly habitat, less easy. Our concern is that if we're, philanthropic money would be wonderful if it helps to increase the overall quality of habitat in the ravines and it improves citizens' interactions with these spaces. But unless there is actually a dedicated source of funding to protecting and restoring this, philanthropic donations are not going to achieve that.
Okay. And I wondered if you had any comments on the priority ranking matrix and whether or not tying our budgets through that methodology here, if you had any comments about that.
I think I have an overarching comment on that, which is just, I was a part of the Ravine Strategy Advisory Group, and in the original draft, one of the first comments that we made was that the language about ecological protection and restoration, it used a lot of the right words in saying that, it is the reason for doing this, it is our primary reason, but throughout the document there were all these other interests that have the potential to influence it. And to potentially damage the same things we're trying to protect. If the protection of habitat and the protection of ecology in our ravines is the priority of the ravine strategy, then it needs to be ranked as such, it needs to be given the funding as such, it needs to be prioritized as such. That is not to say that there should not be other avenues explored, that is not to say citizens should not be able to come down there. The TFN has been doing guided walks in Toronto ravines for 94 years or 90 years, right? So we believe bringing people down and connecting people with nature helps them love these places and that people protect what they love. But that is only part of the equation unless it actually has the teeth to protect nature with money there, with actual resources, with actual staff. It's going to fall to other pressures and not be protected in the way the strategy says it should be protected.
All right, that was the final question. Well, thank you, Councillor Davis, and thank you very much, Mr. Ramsey-Brown. I just have one very quick item I think we can deal with before the lunch break, and that is item 20, with your concurrence, item 2720. Was held by Councillor Ainsley, and he has a fairly straightforward motion that if he moves and you accept it, we can then dispense with that item, just have that off our list before we get back from lunch. Councillor Ainsley?
Yep. Sorry, this is the motion before it. I've talked with the staff at Toronto Fire Services and also the Chief Information Officer. This is just to enhance the project they're doing on data use.
I think the motion is fairly straightforward. Are there any questions of the mover? So moved. Moved by Councillor Ainsley, seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And that would amend the item. And then on the item as amended, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We will stand adjourned, and we'll resume, ladies and gentlemen, the deputations on the ravine strategy at 1:30 this afternoon. Thank you very much. Did you need that? I just crumbled that.
I got that.